Playmates by A.M. Burridge. 1. Although everybody who knew Stephen Everton agreed that he was the last man under heaven who ought to have been allowed to bring up a child, it was fortunate for Monica that she fell into his hands. Else she had probably starved or drifted into some refuge for waifs and strays. True, her father, Sebastian Threlfall, the poet, had plenty of casual friends. Almost everybody knew him slightly, and right up to the time of his final attack of delirium tremens, he contrived to look one of the most interesting of the regular frequenters of the Café Royal. But people are generally not hasty to bring up the children of casual acquaintances, particularly when such children may be suspected of having inherited more than a fair share of human weaknesses. Of Monica's mother, literally nothing was known. Nobody seemed able to say if she were dead or alive. Probably she had long since deserted Threlfall for some consort able and willing to provide regular meals. Everton knew Threlfall no better than 100 others knew him, and was ignorant of his daughter's existence until the father's death was a new topic of conversation in literary and artistic circles. People vaguely wondered what would become of the kid, and while they were still wondering, Everton quietly took possession of her. Who's Who will tell you the year of Everton's birth, the names of his alma maters, Winchester and Magdalen College, Oxford, the titles of his books, and of his predilections for skating and mountaineering, but it is necessary to know the man a little less superficially. He was then a year or two short of 50 and looked 10 years older. He was a tall, lean man with a delicate pink complexion, an oval head, a Roman nose, blue eyes which looked out mildly through strong glasses, and thin, straight lips drawn tightly over slightly protruding teeth. His high forehead was bare, for he was bald to the base of his skull. What remained of his hair was a neutral tint between black and grey, and was kept closely cropped. He contrived to look at once prim and irascible, scholarly and acute. Sherlock Holmes, perhaps, with a touch of old maidishness. The world knew him for a writer of books on historical crises. They were cumbersome books with cumbersome titles, written by a scholar or scholars. They brought him fame and not a little money. The money he could have afforded to be without, since he was modestly wealthy by inheritance. He was essentially a cold-blooded animal, a bachelor, a man of regular and temperate habits, fastidious and fond of quietude and simple comfort. Nobody is ever likely to know why Everton adopted the orphan daughter of a man whom he but knew slightly, and neither liked nor respected. He was no lover of children, and his humours were sardonic rather than sentimental. I am only hazarding a guess when I suggest that, like so many childless men, he had theories of his own concerning the upbringing of children, which he wanted to see tested. Certain it is that Monica's childhood, which had been extraordinary enough before, passed from the tragic to the grotesque. Everton took Monica from the Bloomsbury Apartments house, where the landlady, already nursing a bad death, was wondering how to dispose of the child. Monica was then 8 years old, and a woman of the world in a small way. She had lived with drink and poverty and squalor, had never played a game, nor had a playmate, had seen nothing but the seamy side of life, and had learned skill in practicing her father's petty shifts and mean contrivances. She was grave and sullen and plain and pale, this child who had never known childhood. When she spoke, which was seldom as possible, her voice was hard and gruff. She was, poor little thing, as unattractive as her life could have made her. She went with Everton without question or demur. She would no more have questioned anybody's ownership than if she had been an inanimate piece of luggage left in a cloakroom. She had belonged to her father, Now that he was gone to his own place, she was the property of whomsoever chose to claim her. Everton took her with a cold kindness in which was neither love nor pity. In return, she gave him neither love nor gratitude, but did as she was desired after the manner of a paid servant. Everton disliked modern children, and for what he disliked in them he blamed modern schools. It may have been on this account that he did not send Monica to one, or perhaps he wanted to see how a child would contrive its own education. Monica could already read and write, and thus equipped she had the run of his large library, in which was almost every conceivable kind of book, from heavy tomes on abstruse subjects to trashy modern novels bought and left there by Miss Gribbin. Everton barred nothing, recommended nothing, but watched the tree grow naturally, untended and unpruned. Miss Gribbin was Everton's secretary. She was the kind of hatchet-faced, flat-chested, middle-aged, sexless woman who could safely share the home of a bachelor without either of them being troubled by the tongue of scandal. To her duties was now added the instruction of Monica in certain elementary subjects. Thus Monica learned that a man named William the Conqueror arrived in England in 1066, but to find out what manner of man this William was, she had to go to the library and read the conflicting accounts of him as given by the several historians. From Miss Gribbin she learned bare, irrefutable facts. For the rest, she was left to fend for herself. In the library, she found herself surrounded by all the realms of reality and fancy, each with its door invitingly ajar. Monica was fond of reading. It was indeed almost her only recreation, for Everton knew no other children of her age, and treated her as a grown-up member of the household. Thus she read everything, from translations of the Iliad to Hans Andersen, from the Bible to the love gush of the modern female fiction-mongers. Everton, although he watched her closely and plied her with innocent-sounding questions, was never allowed a peep into her mind. What muddled dreams she may have had of a strange world surrounding the Hampstead house, a world of gods and fairies and demons, and strong, silent men making love to sloppy-minded young women, she kept to herself. Reticence was all that she had in common with normal childhood, and Everton noticed that she never played. Unlike most young animals, she did not take naturally to playing. Perhaps the instinct had been beaten out of her by the realities of life while her father was alive. Most lonely children improvise their own games and provide themselves with a vast store of make-believe. But Monica, as sullen-seeming as a caged animal, devoid alike of the naughtiness and the charms of childhood, rarely crying and still more rarely laughing, moved about the house sedate to the verge of being wooden. Occasionally Everton, the experimentalist, had twinges of conscience and grew half afraid. 2. When Monica was 12, Everton moved his establishment from Hampstead to a house remotely situated in the middle of Suffolk, which was part of a recent legacy. It was a tall, rectangular Queen Anne house, standing on a knoll above marshy fields and wind-bowed beechwoods. Once it had been the manor house, but now little land went with it. A short drive passed between rank evergreens from the heavy wrought iron gate to a circle of grass and flower beds in front of the house. Behind was an acre and a half of rank garden, given over to weeds and marigolds. The rooms were high and well lighted, but the house wore an air of depression, as if it were a live thing, unable to shake off some ancient fit of melancholy. Everton went to live in the house for a variety of reasons. For the most part of a year he had been trying in vain to let or sell it, and it was when he found that he would have no difficulty in disposing of his house at Hampstead that he made up his mind. The old house, a mile distant from a remote Suffolk village, would give him all the solitude he required. Moreover, he was anxious about his health. His nervous system had never been strong, and his doctor had recommended the bracing air of East Anglia. He was not in the least concerned to find that the house was too big for him. His furniture filled the same number of rooms as it had filled at Hampstead, and the others he left empty. Nor did he increase his staff of 3 indoor servants and a gardener. Miss Gribbin, now less dispensable than ever, accompanied him, and with them came Monica, to see another aspect of life, with the same wooden stoicism which Everton had remarked in her on the occasion of their first meeting. As regarded Monica, Miss Gribbin's duties were then becoming more and more a sinecure. Lessons now occupied no more than half an hour a day. The older Monica grew, the better she was able to grub for her education in the great library. Between Monica and Miss Gribbin there was neither love nor sympathy, nor was there any affectation of either. In their common duty to Everton, they owed and paid certain duties to each other. Their intercourse began and ended there. Everton and Miss Gribbin both liked the house at first. It suited the two temperaments which were alike in their lack of festivity. Asked if she too liked it, Monica said simply, yes, in a tone which implied stolid and complete indifference. All three, in their several ways, led much the same lives as they had led at Hampstead, but a slow change began to work in Monica. A change so slight and subtle that weeks passed before Everton or Miss Gribbin noticed it. It was late on an afternoon in early spring when Everton first became aware of something unusual in Monica's demeanour. He had been searching in the library for one of his own books, The Fall of the Commonwealth in England, and having failed to find it, went in search of Miss Gribbin, and met Monica instead at the foot of the long oak staircase. Of her he casually inquired about the book, and she jerked her head up brightly to answer him with an unwonted smile. Yes, I've been reading it. I expect I left it in the schoolroom. I'll go and see. It was a long speech for her to have uttered, but Everton scarcely noticed that at the time. His attention was directed elsewhere. Where did you leave it? He demanded. In the schoolroom, she repeated. I know of no schoolroom, said Everton coldly. He hated to hear anything miscalled, even were it only a room. Miss Gribbin generally takes you for your lessons in either the library or the dining room. If it is in one of those rooms, kindly call it by its proper name. Monica shook her head. No, I mean the schoolroom, the big empty room next to the library. That's what it's called. Everton knew the room. It faced north and seemed darker and more dismal than any other room in the house. He had wondered idly why Monica chose to spend so much of her time in a room bare of furniture, with nothing better to sit on than uncovered boards or a cushionless window seat, and put it down to her genius for being unlike anybody else. Who calls it that? He demanded. It's its name, said Monica, smiling. She ran upstairs and presently returned with the book, which she handed to him with another smile. He was already wondering at her. It was surprising and pleasant to see her run, instead of the heavy and clumsy walk which generally moved her when she went to obey a behest. And she had smiled 2 or 3 times in the short space of a minute. Then he realized that for some little while she had been a brighter, happier creature than ever she had been at Hampstead. How did you come to call that room a schoolroom? He asked as he took the book from her hand. It is the schoolroom, she insisted, seeking to cover her evasion by laying stress on the verb. That was all he could get out of her. As he questioned further, the smile ceased, and the pale, plain little face became devoid of any expression. He knew then that it was useless to press her, but his curiosity was aroused. He inquired of Miss Gribbin and the servants, and learned that nobody was in the habit of calling the long empty apartment the schoolroom. Clearly Monica had given it its name. But why? She was so altogether remote from schools and schoolrooms. Some germ of imagination was active in her small mind. Everton's interest was stimulated. He was like a doctor who remarks in a patient some abnormal symptom. "Monica seems a lot brighter and more alert than she used to be," he remarked to Miss Gribbin. "Yes," agreed the secretary, "I've noticed that. She's learning to play." "To play what? The piano?" No, to play childish games. Haven't you heard her dancing about and singing?" Everton shook his head and looked interested. "I have not," he said. Possibly my presence acts as a check upon her exuberance. I hear her in that empty room which she insists upon calling the schoolroom. She stops when she hears my step. Of course, I haven't interfered with her in any way, but I could wish that she would not talk to herself. I don't like people who do that. It's somehow uncomfortable." "I didn't know she did," said Everton slowly. "Oh yes, quite long conversation. I haven't actually heard what she talks about, but sometimes you'd think that she was in the midst of a circle of friends." "In that same room?" "Generally," said Miss Gribbin with a nod. Everton regarded his secretary with a slow, thoughtful smile. "Development," he said, "is always extremely interesting. I'm glad the place seems to suit Monica." "I think it suits all of us." There was a doubtful note in his voice as he uttered the last words, and Miss Gribbin agreed with him with the same lack of conviction in her tone. As a fact, Everton had been doubtful of late if his health had been benefited by the move from Hampstead. For the first week or two his nerves had been the better for the change of air, but now he was conscious of the beginning of a relapse. His imagination was beginning to play him tricks, filling his mind with vague, distorted fancies. Sometimes, when he sat up late writing, he was given to working at night on strong coffee, he became a victim of the most distressing nervous symptoms, hard to analyze and impossible to combat, which invariably drove him to bed with a sense of defeat. That same night, he suffered one of the variations of this common experience. It was close upon midnight when he felt stealing over him a sense of discomfort which he was compelled to classify as fear. He was working in a small room leading out of the drawing room which he had selected for his study. At first, he was scarcely aware of the sensation. The effect was always cumulative. The burden was laid upon him, straw by straw. It began with his being oppressed by the silence of the house. He became more and more acutely conscious of it, until it became like a thing tangible, a prison of solid walls growing around him. The scratching of his pen at first relieved the tension. He wrote words and erased them again for the sake of the comfortable sound. But presently that comfort was denied him. For it seemed to him that this minute and busy noise was attracting attention to himself. Yes, that was it. He was being watched. Everton sat quite still, the pen poised an inch above the half-covered sheet of paper. This had become a familiar sensation. He was being watched. And by what? And from what corner of the room? He forced a tremulous smile to his lips. One moment he called himself ridiculous. The next he asked himself hopelessly how a man could argue with his nerves. Experience had taught him that the only cure, and that a temporary one, was to go to bed. Yet he sat on, anxious to learn more about himself, to coax his vague imaginings into some definite shape. Imagination told him that he was being watched, and although he called it imagination, he was afraid. That rapid beating against his ribs was his heart warning him of fear. But he sat rigid, anxious to learn in what part of the room his fancy would place these imaginary watchers. For he was conscious of the gaze of more than one pair of eyes being bent upon him. At first the experiment failed. The rigidity of his pose, the hold he was keeping upon himself, acted as a brake upon his mind. Presently he realized this and relaxed the tension, striving to give his mind that perfect freedom which might have been demanded by a hypnotist or one experimenting in telepathy. Almost at once he thought of the door. The eyes of his mind veered around in that direction as the needle of a compass veers to the magnetic north. With these eyes of his imagination, he saw the door. It was standing half open, and the aperture was thronged with faces. What kind of faces? He could not tell. They were just faces. Imagination left it at that. But he was aware that these spies were timid, that they were in some wise as fearful of him as he was of them, that to scatter them he had but to turn his head and gaze at them with the eyes of his body. The door was at his shoulder. He turned his head suddenly and gave it one swift glance out of the tail of his eye. However imagination deceived him, it had not played him false about the door. It was standing half open, although he could have sworn that he had closed it on entering the room. The aperture was empty. Only darkness, solid as a pillar, filled the space between floor and lintel. But although he saw nothing as he turned his head, he was dimly conscious of something vanishing, a scurrying, noiseless and incredibly swift, like the flitting of trout in clear, shallow water. Everton stood up, stretched himself, and brought his knuckles up to his strained eyes. He told himself that he must go to bed. It was bad enough that he must suffer these nervous attacks. To encourage them was madness. But as he mounted the stairs, he was still conscious of not being alone. Shy, timorous, ready to melt into the shadows of the walls if he turned his head. They were following him, whispering noiselessly, linking hands and arms, watching him with the fearful, awed curiosity of children. 3. The vicar had called upon Everton. His name was Parslow, and he was a typical country parson of the poorer sort, a tall, rugged, shabby, worried man in the middle 40s, obviously embarrassed by the eternal problem of making ends meet on an inadequate stipend. Everton received him courteously enough, but with a certain coldness which implied that he had nothing in common with his visitor. Parslow was evidently disappointed because the new people were not churchgoers, nor likely to take much interest in the parish. The two men made half-hearted and vain attempts to find common ground. It was not until he was on the point of leaving that the vicar mentioned Monica. "You have, I believe, a little girl," he said. "Yes, my small ward." I expect she finds it lonely here. I have a little girl of the same age. She is at present away at school, but she'll be home soon for the Easter holidays. I know she'd be delighted if your little, ward would come down to the vicarage and play with her sometimes." The suggestion was not particularly welcome to Everton, and his thanks were perfunctory. This other small girl, although she was a vicar's daughter, might carry the contagion of other modern children and infect Monica with a pertness and slanginess which he so detested. Altogether, he was determined to have as little to do with the vicarage as possible. Meanwhile, the child was becoming to him a study of more and more absorbing interest. The change in her was almost as marked as if she had just returned after having spent a term at school. She astonished and mystified him by using expressions which she could scarcely have learned from any member of the household. It was not the jargon of the smart young people of the day which slipped easily from her lips, but the polite family slang of his own youth. For instance, she remarked one morning that Mead, the gardener, was a whale at pruning vines. A whale! The expression took Everton back a very long way down the level road of the spent years, took him indeed to a nursery in a solid, respectable house in a Belgravian square, where he had heard the word used in that same sense for the first time. His sister Gertrude, aged 10, notorious in those days for picking up loose expressions, announced that she was getting to be a whale at French. Yes, in those days an expert was a whale or a don, not, as he is today, a stout fellow. But who was a whale nowadays? It was years since he'd heard the term. "Where did you learn to say that?" he demanded in so strange a tone that Monica stared at him anxiously. "Isn't it right?" she asked eagerly. She might have been a child at a new school, fearful of not having acquired the fashionable phraseology of the place. "It is a slang expression," said the purist coldly. "It used to mean a person who was proficient in something. How did you come to hear it?" She smiled without answering, and her smile was mysterious, even coquettish after a childish fashion. Silence had always been her refuge, but it was no longer sullen silence. She was changing rapidly, and in a manner to bewilder her guardian. He failed in an effort to cross-examine her, and later in the day consulted Miss Gribbin. "That child," he said, "is reading something that we know nothing about." "Just at present," said Miss Gribbin, "she's glued to Dickens and Stevenson." "Then where on earth does she get her expressions?" "I don't know," the secretary retorted testily, "any more than I know how she learned to play cat's cradle." "What, that game with the string? Does she play that?" "I found her doing something quite complicated and elaborate the other day. She wouldn't tell me how she learned to do it. I took the trouble to question the servants, but none of them had shown her." Everton frowned. "And I know of no book in the library which tells how to perform tricks with string. Do you think she has made a clandestine friendship with any of the village children?" Miss Gribbin shook her head. "She's too fastidious for that. Besides, she seldom goes into the village alone." There, for the time, the discussion ended. Everton, with all the curiosity of the student, watched the child as carefully and as closely as he was able, without at the same time arousing her suspicions. She was developing fast. He had known that she must develop, but the manner of her doing so amazed and mystified him, and likely as not, denied some preconceived theory. The untended plant was not only growing, but showed signs of pruning. It was as if there were outside influences at work on Monica, which could have come neither from him nor from any other member of the household. Winter was dying hard, and dark days of rain kept Miss Gribbin, Monica, and Everton within doors. He lacked no opportunities of keeping the child under observation, and once, on a gloomy afternoon, passing the room which he had named the schoolroom, he paused and listened, until he became suddenly aware that his conduct bore an unpleasant resemblance to eavesdropping. The psychologist and the gentleman engaged in a brief struggle, in which the gentleman temporarily got the upper hand. Everton approached the door with a heavy step and flung it open. The sensation he received, as he pushed open the door, was vague, yet slightly disturbing, and it was by no means new to him. Several times of late, but generally after dark, he had entered an empty room with the impression that it had been occupied by others until the very moment of his crossing the threshold. His coming disturbed not merely one or two, but a crowd. He felt them rather than heard them, scattering, flying swiftly and silently as shadows to incredible hiding places, where they held breath and watched and waited for him to go. Into the same atmosphere of tension he now walked and looked about him, as if expecting to see more than only the child who held the door in the middle of the room, or some telltale trace of other children in hiding. Had the room been furnished, he must have looked involuntarily for shoes protruding from under tables or settees, for ends of garments unconsciously left exposed. The long room, however, was empty save for Monica, from wainscot to wainscot and from floor to ceiling. Fronting him were the long high windows starred by fine rain. With her back to the white filtered light, Monica faced him, looking up to him as he entered. He was just in time to see a smile fading from her lips. He also saw by a slight convulsive movement of her shoulders that she was hiding something from him, in the hands clasped behind her back. "Hello," he said with a kind of forced geniality. "What are you up to?" She said, "Nothing," but not as sullenly as she would once have said it. "Come," said Everton, "that's impossible. You were talking to yourself, Monica. You shouldn't do that. It's an idle and very, very foolish habit. You'll go mad if you continue to do that." She let her head droop a little. I wasn't talking to myself," she said in a low, half-playful but very deliberate tone. "That's nonsense, I heard you. I wasn't talking to myself. But you must have been. There's nobody else here. There isn't now." "What do you mean, now?" "They've gone. You frightened them, I expect." "What do you mean?" he repeated, advancing a step or two towards her. "And whom do you call they?" Next moment he was angry with himself. His tone was so heavy and serious, and the child was half laughing at him. It was as if she were triumphant at having inveigled him into taking a serious part in her own game of make-believe. "You wouldn't understand," she said. "I understand this, that you are wasting your time and being a very silly little girl. What's that you're hiding behind your back?" She held out her right hand at once, unclenched her fingers, and disclosed a thimble. He looked at it and then into her face. "Why did you hide that from me?" he asked. "There was no need." She gave him her faint, secretive smile, that new smile of hers, before replying. "We were playing with it. I didn't want you to know." "You were playing with it, you mean? And why didn't you want me to know?" "About them. Because I thought you wouldn't understand. You don't understand." He saw that it was useless to affect anger or show impatience. He spoke to her gently, even with an attempt at displaying sympathy. "Who are they?" he asked. "They're just them, other girls." "I see. And they come and play with you, do they? And they run away whenever I'm about because they don't like me. Is that it?" She shook her head. "It isn't that they don't like you. I think they like everybody. But they're so shy. They were shy of me for a long, long time. I knew they were there, but it was weeks and weeks before they'd come and play with me. It was weeks before I even saw them." "Yes? Well, what are they like?" "Oh, they're just girls, and they're awfully, awfully nice. Some are a bit older than me, and some are a bit younger, and they don't dress like other girls you see today. They're in white with longer skirts, and they wear sashes." Everton inclined his head gravely. She got that out of the illustrations of books in the library, he reflected. "You don't happen to know their names, I suppose?" he asked, hoping that no quizzical note in his voice rang through the casual but sincere tone which he intended. "Oh, yes, there's Mary Hewitt. I think I love her best of all. And Elsie Power, and how many of them altogether?" 7. It's just a nice number, and this is the schoolroom where we play games. I love games. I wish I'd learned to play games before." "And you've been playing with the thimble?" "Yes, hunt the thimble, they call it. One of us hides it, and then the rest of us try to find it, and the one who finds it hides it again." "You mean you hide it yourself, and then go and find it?" The smile left her face at once, and the look in her eyes warned him that she was done with confidences. "Ah," she exclaimed, "you don't understand, after all. I somehow knew you wouldn't." Everton, however, thought he did. His face wore a sudden smile of relief. "Well, never mind," he said, "but I shouldn't play too much if I were you." With that he left her. But curiosity tempted him, not in vain, to linger and listen for a moment on the other side of the door which he had closed behind him. He heard Monica whisper, "Mary, Elsie, come on, it's all right. He's gone now." At an answering whisper, very unlike Monica's, he started violently. and then found himself grinning at his own discomfiture. It was natural that Monica, playing many parts, should try to change her voice with every character. He went downstairs sunk in a brown study which brought him to certain interesting conclusions. A little later he communicated these to Miss Gribbin. "I've discovered the cause of the change in Monica. She's invented for herself some imaginary friends, other little girls, of course." Miss Gribbin started slightly and looked up from the newspaper which she had been reading. "Really?" she exclaimed. "Isn't that rather an unhealthy sign?" "No, I should say not. Having imaginary friends is quite a common symptom of childhood, especially among young girls. I remember my sister used to have one, and was very angry when none of the rest of us would take the matter seriously. In Monica's case, I should say it was perfectly normal, but interesting. She must have inherited an imagination from that father of hers, with the result that she has 7 imaginary friends, all properly named, if you please. You see, being lonely and having no friends of her own age, she would naturally invent more than one friend. They're all nicely and primly dressed, I must tell you, out of Victorian books which she has found in the library." "It can't be healthy," said Miss Gribbin, pursing her lips, "and I can't understand how she's learned certain expressions and a certain style of talking and games, all out of books, and she pretends to herself that they have taught her. But the most interesting part of the affair is this: it's given me my first practical experience of telepathy, of the existence of which I had hitherto been rather sceptical. Since Monica invented this new game, and before I was aware that she had done so, I have had at different times distinct impressions of there being a lot of little girls about the house." Miss Gribbin started and stared. Her lips parted, as if she were about to speak, but it was as if she changed her mind while framing the first word she had been about to utter. "Monica," he continued, smiling, "invented these friends, and has been making me telepathically aware of them too. I've lately been most concerned about the state of my nerves." Miss Gribbin jumped up as if in anger, but her brow was smooth and her mouth dropped at the corners. "Mr. Everton," she said, "I wish you had not told me all this." Her lips worked. "You see," she added unsteadily, "I don't believe in telepathy." 4. Easter, which fell early that year, brought little Gladys Parslow home for the holidays to the vicarage. Event was shortly afterwards signalised by a note from the vicar to Everton, inviting him to send Monica down to have tea and play games with his little daughter on the following Wednesday. The invitation was an annoyance and an embarrassment to Everton. Here was the disturbing factor, the outside influence which might possibly thwart his experiment in the upbringing of Monica. He was free, of course, simply to decline the invitation so coldly and briefly as to make sure that it would not be repeated. But the man was not strong enough to stand on his own feet, impervious to the winds of criticism. He was sensitive and had little wish to seem churlish, still less to appear ridiculous. Taking the line of least resistance, he began to reason that one child, herself no older than Monica, and in the atmosphere of her own home, could make little impression. It ended in his allowing Monica to go. Monica herself seemed pleased at the prospect of going, but expressed her pleasure in a discreet, restrained, grown-up way. Miss Gribbin accompanied her as far as the vicarage doorstep, arriving with her punctually at 3:30 on a sullen and muggy afternoon, and handed her over to the woman of all work who answered the summons at the door. Miss Gribbin reported to Everton on her return. An idea which she conceived to be humorous had possession of her mind, and in talking to Everton she uttered one of her infrequent laughs. "I only left her at the door," she said, "so I didn't see her meet the other little girl. I wish I'd stayed to see that. It must have been funny." She irritated Everton by speaking exactly as if Monica were a captive animal which had just been shown for the first time in its life another of its own kind. The analogy thus conveyed to Everton was close enough to make him wince. He felt something like a twinge of conscience. and it may have been then that he asked himself for the first time if he were being fair to Monica. It had never once occurred to him to ask himself if she were happy. The truth was that he understood children so little as to suppose that physical cruelty was the one kind of cruelty from which they were capable of suffering. Had he ever before troubled to ask himself if Monica were happy, he had probably given the question a curt dismissal with the thought that she had no right to be otherwise. He had given her a good home, even luxuries, together with every opportunity to develop her mind. For companions, she had himself, Miss Gribbin, and, to a limited extent, the servants. Ah, but that picture, conjured up by Miss Gribbin's words with their accompaniment of unreasonable laughter, the little creature meeting for the first time another little creature of its own kind, and looking bewildered, knowing neither what to do nor what to say. There was pathos in that, uncomfortable pathos for Everton. Those imaginary friends, did they really mean that Monica had needs of which he knew nothing, of which he had never troubled to learn? He was not an unkind man, and it hurt him to suspect that he might have committed an unkindness. The modern children whose behaviour and manners he disliked were perhaps only obeying some inexorable law of evolution. Suppose in keeping Monica from their companionship he were actually flying in the face of nature. Suppose, after all, if Monica were to be natural, she must go unhindered on the tide of her generation. He compromised with himself, pacing the little study. He would watch Monica much more closely, question her when he had the chance. Then, if he found she was not happy and really needed the companionship of other children, he would see what could be done. But when Monica returned home from the vicarage, it was quite plain that she had not enjoyed herself. She was subdued and said very little about her experience. Quite obviously, the two little girls had not made very good friends. Questioned, Monica confessed that she did not like Gladys much. She said this very thoughtfully with a little pause before the adverb. "Why don't you like her?" Everton demanded bluntly. "I don't know, she's so funny, not like other girls." "And what do you know about other girls?" he demanded, faintly amused. "Well, she's not a bit like—" Monica paused suddenly and lowered her gaze. "Not like your friends, you mean?" Everton asked. She gave him a quick, penetrating little glance and then lowered her gaze once more. "No," she said, "not a bit." She wouldn't be, of course. Everton teased the child with no more questions for the time being and let her go. She ran off at once to the great empty room, there to seek that uncanny companionship which had come to suffice her. For the moment, Everton was satisfied. Monica was perfectly happy as she was, and had no need of Gladys, or probably any other child friends. His experiment with her was shaping successfully. She had invented her own young friends, and had gone off eagerly to play with the creations of her own fancy. This seemed very well at first. Everton reflected that it was just what he would have wished, until he realized suddenly, with a little shock of discomfort, that it was not normal, and it was not healthy. 5. Although Monica plainly had no great desire to see any more of Gladys Parslow, common civility made it necessary for the vicar's little daughter to be asked to pay a return visit. Most likely Gladys Parslow was as unwilling to come as Monica to entertain her. Stern discipline, however, presented her at the appointed time on an afternoon prearranged by correspondence, when Monica received her coldly and with dignity tempered by a sort of grown-up graciousness. Monica bore her guest away to the big empty room, and that was the last of Gladys Parslow seen by Everton or Miss Gribbin that afternoon. Monica appeared alone when the gong sounded for tea, and announced in a subdued tone that Gladys had already gone home. "Did you quarrel with her?" Miss Gribbin asked quickly. "No." "Then why's she gone like this?" "She was stupid," said Monica simply, "that's all." "Perhaps it was you who was stupid. Why did she go?" "She got frightened." "Frightened?" "She didn't like my friends." Miss Gribbin exchanged glances with Everton. She didn't like a silly little girl who talks to herself and imagines things. No wonder she was frightened. She didn't think they were real at first and laughed at me, said Monica, sitting down. Naturally. And then, when she saw them, Miss Gribbin and Everton interrupted her simultaneously, repeating in unison and with well-matched astonishment her two last words. And then, when she saw them, Monica continued, unperturbed, she didn't like it. I think she was frightened. Anyhow, she said she wouldn't stay and went straight off home. I think she's a stupid girl. We all had a good laugh about her after she was gone. She spoke in her ordinary matter-of-fact tones, and if she was secretly pleased at the state of perturbation into which her words had obviously thrown Miss Gribbin, she gave no sign of it. Miss Gribbin immediately exhibited outward signs of anger. "You are a very naughty child to tell such untruths. You know perfectly well that Gladys couldn't have seen your friends. You're simply frightened her by pretending to talk to people who weren't there, and it will serve you right if she never comes to play with you again." "She won't," said Monica, "and she did see them, Miss Gribbin." "How do you know?" Everton asked. "By her face, and she spoke to them too when she ran to the door. They were very shy at first because Gladys was there. They wouldn't come for a long time, but I begged them, and at last they did." Everton checked another outburst from Miss Gribbin with a look. He wanted to learn more, and to that end he applied some show of patience and gentleness. "Where did they come from?" he asked. "From outside the door?" "Oh no, from where they always come." "And where's that?" "I don't know. They don't seem to know themselves. It's always from some direction where I'm not looking. Isn't it strange?" "Very. And do they disappear in the same way?" Monica frowned very seriously and thoughtfully. "It's so quick, you can't tell where they go. When you or Miss Gribbin come in, they always fly on our approach, of course." "But why?" "Because they're dreadfully, dreadfully shy. But not so shy as they were. Perhaps soon they'll get used to you and not mind at all." "That's a comforting thought," said Everton, with a dry laugh. When Monica had taken her tea and departed, Everton turned to his secretary. "You were wrong to blame the child. These creations of her fancy are perfectly real to her. Her powers of suggestion have been strong enough to force them to some extent on me. The little Parslow girl, being younger and more receptive, actually sees them. It's a clear case of telepathy and autosuggestion. I've never studied such matters, but I should say that these instances are of some scientific interest." Miss Gribbin's lips tightened and he saw her shiver slightly. "Mr. Parslow will be angry," was all she said. "I really cannot help that. Perhaps it's all for the best. If Monica doesn't like his little daughter, they had better not be brought together again." For all that, Everton was a little embarrassed when on the following morning he met the vicar out walking. If the Reverend Parslow knew that his little daughter had left the house so unceremoniously on the preceding day, he would either wish to make an apology or perhaps require one, according to his view of the situation. Everton did not wish to deal in apologies one way or the other. He did not care to discuss the vagaries of children, and altogether he wanted to have as little to do with Mr. Parslow as was conveniently possible. He would have passed with a brief acknowledgment of the vicar's existence, but, as he had feared, the vicar stopped him. "I've been meaning to come and see you," said the Reverend Parslow. Everton halted and sighed inaudibly, thinking that perhaps this casual meeting out of doors might, after all, have saved him something. "Yes," he said. "I will walk in your direction, if I may." The vicar eyed him anxiously. "There is something you must certainly be told. I don't know if you guess or if you already know. If not, I don't know how you'll take it. I really don't." Everton looked puzzled. Whichever child the vicar might blame for the hurried departure of Gladys, there seemed no cause for such a portentous face and manner. "Really?" he asked. "Is it something serious?" "I think so, Mr. Everton. You are aware, of course, that my little girl left your house yesterday afternoon with some lack of ceremony." "Yes, Monica told us she'd gone." If they couldn't agree, it was surely the best thing she could have done, although it may sound inhospitable of me to say it. "Excuse me, Mr. Parslow, but I hope you're not trying to embroil me in quarrels between children." The vicar stared in his turn. "I am not," he said, "and I am unaware that there was any quarrel. I was going to ask you to forgive Gladys if there was some excuse for her lack of ceremony. She was badly frightened, poor child." Then it is my turn to express regret. I had Monica's version of what happened. Monica has been left a great deal on her own resources, and having no playmates of her own age, she seems to have invented some. "Ah," said the Reverend Parslow, drawing a deep breath. "Unfortunately," Everton continued, "Monica has an uncomfortable gift for impressing her fancies on other people. I have often thought I felt the presence of children about the house, and so, I'm almost sure, has Miss Gribbin. I'm afraid that when your little girl came to play with her yesterday afternoon, Monica scared her by introducing her invisible friends and by talking to imaginary and therefore invisible little girls." The vicar laid a hand on Everton's arm. "There is something more in it than that. Gladys is not an imaginative child. She is indeed a very practical little person. I have never yet known her to tell me a lie. What would you say, Mr. Everton, if I were to tell you that Gladys positively asserts that she saw those other children?" Something like a cold draught went through Everton. An ugly suspicion, vague and almost shapeless, began to move in dim recesses of his mind. He tried to shake himself free of it, to smile and to speak lightly. I shouldn't be in the least surprised. Nobody knows the limits of telepathy and autosuggestion. If I can feel the presence of children whom Monica has created out of her own imagination, why shouldn't your daughter, who is probably more receptive and impressionable than I am, be able to see them?" The Reverend Parslow shook his head. "Do you really mean that?" he asked. "Doesn't it seem to you a little far-fetched?" "Everything we don't understand must seem far-fetched. If one had dared to talk of wireless 30 years ago." "Mr. Everton, do you know that your house was once a girls' school?" Once more Everton experienced that vague feeling of discomfiture. "I didn't know," he said, still indifferently. "My aunt, whom I never saw, was there. Indeed, she died there. There were 7 who died. Diphtheria broke out there many years ago. It ruined the school, which was shortly afterwards closed. Did you know that, Mr. Everton?" "My aunt's name was Mary Hewitt." "Good God!" Everton cried out sharply. "Good God!" "Ah," said Parslow, "now do you begin to see?" Everton, suddenly a little giddy, passed a hand across his forehead. "That is one of the names that Monica told me," he faltered. "How could she know?" "How indeed? Mary Hewitt's great friend was Elsie Power. They died within a few hours of each other." "That name too? She told me, and there were 7. How could she have known? Even the people around here wouldn't have remembered names after all these years." "Gladys knew them, but that was only partly why she was afraid. Yet I think she was more awed than afraid, because she knew instinctively that the children who came to play with little Monica, although they were not of this world, were good children, blessed children." "What are you telling me?" Everton burst out. "Don't be afraid, Mr. Everton. You're not afraid, are you? If those whom we call dead still remain close to us, what more natural than these children should come back to play with a lonely little girl who lacked human playmates? It may seem inconceivable, but how else explain it? How could little Monica have invented those 2 names? How could she have learned that 7 little girls once died in your house? Only the very old people about here remember it, and even they could not tell you how many died, or the name of any of the little victims. Haven't you noticed a change in your ward since first she began to imagine them, as you thought?" Everton nodded heavily. "Yes," he said, almost unwittingly. "She learned all sorts of tricks of speech, childish gestures which she never had before, and games. I couldn't understand, Mr. Parslow. What in God's name am I to do?" The Reverend Parslow still kept a hand on Everton's arm. If I were you, I should send her off to school. It may not be very good for her. Not good for her, but the children, you said. Children, I might have said angels. They will never harm her. But Monica is developing a gift of seeing and conversing with beings that are invisible and inaudible to others. It is not a gift to be encouraged. She may in time see and converse with others, wretched souls, who are not God's children. She may lose the faculty if she mixes with others of her age. Out of her need, I'm sure, these came to her. I must think, said Everton. He walked on dazedly. In a moment or two, the whole aspect of life had changed, had grown clearer, as if he had been blind from birth and was now given the first glimmerings of light. He looked forward no longer into the face of a blank and featureless wall, but through a curtain beyond which life manifested itself vaguely, but at least perceptibly. His footfalls on the ground beat out the words, "There is no death. There is no death." 6. That evening after dinner, he sent for Monica and spoke to her in an unaccustomed way. He was strangely shy of her, and his hand, which he rested on one of her slim shoulders, lay there awkwardly. "Do you know what I'm going to do with you, young woman?" he said. I'm going to pack you off to school." "Oh," she stared at him, half smiling. "Are you really? Do you want to go?" She considered the matter, frowning and staring at the tips of her fingers. "I don't know. I don't want to leave them." "Who?" he asked. "Oh, you know," she said, and turned her head half shyly. "What, your friends, Monica?" "Yes." "Wouldn't you like other playmates?" "I don't know. I love them, you see, but they said I ought to go to school if you ever sent me. They might be angry with me if I was to ask you to let me stay. They wanted me to play with other girls who aren't like they are, because, you know, they are different from children that everybody can see. And Mary told me not to encourage anybody else who was different, like them." Everton drew a deep breath. "We'll have a talk tomorrow about finding a school for you, Monica," he said. "Run off to bed now. Good night, my dear." He hesitated, then touched her forehead with his lips. She ran from him, nearly as shy as Everton himself, tossing back her long hair. But from the door she gave him the strangest little brimming glance, and there was that in her eyes which he had never seen before. Late that night, Everton entered the great empty room which Monica had named the schoolroom. A flag of moonlight from the window lay across the floor, and it was empty to the gaze. But the deep shadows hid little shy presences, of which some unnamed and undeveloped sense in the man was acutely aware. "Children," he whispered. "Children." He closed his eyes and stretched out his hands. Still they were shy and held aloof, but he fancied that they came a little nearer. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I'm only a very lonely man. Be near me after Monica is gone." He paused, waiting. Then, as he turned away, he was aware of little caressing hands upon his arm. He looked around at once, but the time had not yet come for him to see. He saw only the barred window, the shadows on either wall, and the flag of moonlight.
Everybody dies, and everybody dies. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do they come back?
So that was Playmates by A.M. Burridge. And now we've come to the part of the podcast where I discuss the story and my reactions and thoughts to it. If you are just looking for straight stories for hours on end, to get off to sleep or something, then please go to the YouTube channel playlist called Sleep Stories, and you'll find there are long compilations of stories with no ads, apart from the beginning and the end, and no commentary. In fact, it's just story after story. Another solution might be to go to the full audiobook playlist, and I've done the full audiobooks of The Phantom of the Opera, which is like 9 hours. Frankenstein's about 8, Dracula's about 14. But there are a whole bunch of those long, so that's a solution to the problem. If you don't like ads at all, then of course this is a little selling thing here. You could become a patron. So if you go to www.patreon.com/Barcud, B-A-R-C-U-D, Barcud, what you'll find is there's a library. I keep a link to my Google Drive where I have all the stories, so you can kind of download them to your heart's content. No ads on those ones. So those are 2 solutions, and now let's talk about the story. Playmates, the quietly unsettling world of Playmates by A.M. Burrage. So it's a short story. It's not that short. It's about just shy of an hour. So maybe about 10,000 words even. It was published in 1927 in the anthology Some Ghost Stories, and because it was a good story, it's been anthologized a number of times, particularly, well, in a number, but where I first came across it, I think, is the 1983 anthology by Roald Dahl, his book of ghost stories. There's been an edition of A.M. Burrage's work put out by the British Library called Little Blue Flames, and I had the great privilege of sitting at a talk given by the editor of that Little Blue Flames British Library, Nick Freeman. And the previous night I bought the book, and I didn't know he was going to be giving a talk. And then when he came up, I thought, he's made some very sensible things to say. So he talks in his introduction. This is quite interesting. During the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917, Private A.M. Burrage of the Artists' Rifles had some form of premonition he described as seeing through the dark glass. Shortly before his platoon was to attack the German lines, he recalled later in 1930, their commander, so the attack was in 1917, obviously, their commander smiled at something, Burrage said, and as he smiled, I saw death looking at me from out of his eyes, and I knew that his number was up. The bluntness of the trench slang cannot disguise what was obviously a terrifying experience. I can't describe what I saw, Burrage continues. It was just death, and it made me afraid in a ghastly, shuddering way. The momentary transfiguration was just as unpleasant as if his features had melted into the bones of a death's head. The young officer was killed a few minutes later. So, when he's talking about Burrage, he says, this is Nick Freeman, he said, there are therefore quite these ghosts, Burrage's ghosts, are quite different from the ghosts conjured by many of his contemporaries. So his ghosts manifest themselves without warning in commonplace surroundings, rented rooms, railway carriages, hotels, a party game, a holiday cottage, and are more likely to be the spirits of the relatively recently departed than malign ancient forces on nameless cosmic horrors. First one, of course, is a mention of M.R. James, and the second is Lovecraft. They are quite different from the ghosts conjured by many of their contemporaries. I just said that. Burrage admired M.R. James, who grudgingly admitted that his stories kept on the right side and were not altogether bad, but his own fiction was set in a world far removed from the academic antiquarianism of casting the runes, which we've done, or the Latin cryptograms of the treasure of Abbot Thomas, which we haven't done, M.R. James, and his ghosts were more human than the intensely horrible face of crumpled linen that terrifies the hapless Parkins at the final finale of O Whistle and I'll Come to You. Burrage avoided the mysticism of Arthur Machen, which I love, the pantheism of Algernon Blackwood, which can be pretty good in Descent into Egypt and The Man Whom the Trees Loved, and the dreamy poetry of Walter de la Mare, thinking of Quincunx and All Hallows. His writing has something of the briskness of E.F. Benson's spook stories. I can see that. We did an E.F. Benson last week in the Tube, but his characters are usually less socially elevated. They were from different social classes. His work shows, this is Burrage, a notable awareness of the injustices wrought by wealth and class. and he lacks Benson's enthusiasm for the monstrous, the bioluminescent giant caterpillar of Negotium perambulans. A great story had done that, or the shadowy thing that waved as if it had been the head and forepart of some huge snake in And No Bird Sings, which I haven't done that. I have no place in Burridge's world. Burridge wrote an essay in 1921 called The Supernatural in Fiction, expressed his admiration for the perfect fusion of style and content in Henry James's The Turn of the Screw. Absolutely, you can see that. He liked H.G. Wells, whose plain style influenced his own. He saw himself as more akin to a journalist than a Jamesian artist. There's a very interesting thing where he says he began to see the rewards of his labours with short stories, because his father or his family had been writers, professional writers. So Burridge started by writing children's stories to chums and other boys' papers, and he moved on to the adult market. He said he claimed to be lazy, but he clearly thrived on deadline adrenaline. He preferred the swift returns from short stories and serials to the uncertainties of royalty payments. And then, of course, when war broke out in 1914, he signed up. He was most popular in the 20s. He did a couple of collections. Some Ghost Stories, 1927, which we've already referenced. Someone in the Room, 1931, both of which were well received. Perhaps surprisingly, however, neither was reprinted despite the presence of details such as Smee, the Waxwork and the Sweeper in other anthologies, which we've all done. I like Burridge. And it's very interesting, he says that about when you compare with other writers, it's like flavours of wine, isn't it? They're all writing ghost stories, but somebody's a Rioja and somebody's a Merlot and somebody's a Retsina. So they're all different. So I can see when he goes through that, he's not M.R. James, he's not Lovecraft, he's not Henry James, he's not. The list could go on, couldn't it? He's an ordinary man in many ways, although this story is more in line with the privileged world of somebody like Walter de la Mare or E.F. Benson. E.F. Benson's are more upper class, socially upper class, and amusingly upper class in many ways. Whereas this is quite somber, this story, but it's got a lovely uplift at the end. It leads me on to, and I haven't even spoken about the story, but Roald Dahl, who produced his collection, Ghost Stories, Book of Ghost Stories, I think in '83, he was approached. This is from Roald Dahl's introduction to his, and he says Alfred Knopf, the American publisher, had a half-brother called Edwin. Edwin was a film producer in Hollywood, and a long time ago, back in 1958, this is Roald Dahl, went to him with the idea that we should do a television series together of nothing but ghost stories. He liked it, so they agreed that Roald Dahl would go off and search out the 24 super ghost stories that were going to be the basis of the story. And Roald Dahl says, on the face of it, my job didn't appear to be too onerous. In the second half of the last century, and then the early part of this one, ghost stories were very much the fashion. Dickens had written one, J.M. Barrie had done several, so had Hartley Dickens, E.F. Benson, John Collier and the rest. So he said he started to read. He read 749 ghost stories. This is Dahl. This is what he says. I was completely dazed by reading so much rubbish. But as I staggered away from the piles of books and magazines, I had the satisfaction of knowing that I had found 24 good ones and another 10 besides. So basically he says he reads hundreds of ghost stories and mostly they were trash. I think he's being a little harsh, but he's right in that many of the stories that were written are rotten. And so he actually, I don't know if you've got this, it's a book worth getting if you're interested in this, and I'm very, well, I'll tell you there's a story. So I've got a lot of anthologies of ghost stories, and I've got too many books, and I need to get rid of some. So I'm working my way through them and taking the stories, and I came across this one, and I saw, we've done most of these. So W.S. by L.P. Hartley, good. Harry by Rosemary Timperley, good. The Corner Shop, Cynthia Asquith, good. In the Tube, Benson. Christmas Meeting, Rosemary Timperley. He's put her in twice, so he must like her. I think Burridge gets in twice as well. He gets The Sweeper, which we've done, and Playmate, so he gets Robert Aikman, Mary Treadgold, which we haven't done, Elias and the Draug by Jonas Lear, The Ghost of a Hand by Sheridan Le Fanu, afterward done. Edith Wharton on the Brighton Road, Richard Middleton, The Upper Berth, F. Marion Crawford. So the only one out of this I haven't done so far. There are two. One is The Telephone by Mary Treadgold and The Ghost of a Hand by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. I've done a lot of Sheridan Le Fanu stuff in the past. Never done any Mary Treadgold. But if Roald Dahl's picked them, they're probably worth doing, so I think I will do them. And then when I've done those, I can give this book away. Hooray! And I've saved an inch from my bookshelf, which will be filled with more books. But you know, I process books, so I get loads in. And I read them, and I keep some, and I get rid of those ones, and then eventually, even the ones I kept, I mostly get rid of. But I'm still surrounded by books. Anyway, so I thought those introductions to both of those were worth reading. I think the thing to say about Dahl's choice is he likes stories that aren't just scare stories. He likes them, and that betrays his interest in proper literature, if you like, which is about characters and character and human concern. So not for him the pulp story that is simply there to scare. These stories he has picked have kind of other themes to them, and we'll talk about what they are in this one. I also note that in many of his stories there's a kind of a nice little uplift at the end. There's a moral win at the end, rather than just being kind of Lovecraftian dismal, like we are all doomed, the weather is going to kill us. I was watching Bodkin, which is this Netflix series set in West Cork in Ireland, and the guy says, haven't you heard the weather's going to kill us all? If it doesn't stop raining here, it might do that. Anyway, so we've talked about the story itself, where it came from, and the fact that Burridge wrote a bunch of good stories, and he was a very workaday bloke, you know, he was a proper writer, and then he was brave and he volunteered for the Artists' Rifles, and then he had some pretty horrific experiences in the First World War, as anybody who went to it did, as probably anybody who's, I've never fought in a war, but I can imagine that pretty much everybody who has probably had some very unpleasant experiences, to say the least. Okay, so what we've got are, the themes are loneliness and isolation, and we have Monica and Everton. So Stephen Everton is this dry as dust historian who does quite well out of very dull books, and he's a bit of an intellectual snob, and in fact a snob, because he doesn't want the kid picking up ordinary slangy ways. So there he is, and he's cold, isn't he? He treats her, a person, as an experiment, and the fact that she has had a louche father who was an artiste, and this is of course the image of the artist, isn't it, that they don't play by the conventions, so they are irresponsible to their children, and maybe many of them are and were, but certainly this poor little girl is, this guy was an artist, but he had responsibilities to people. I suppose that might be a theme here, that we as humans have responsibility to other humans, rather than just living a hedonistic life and following. Maybe that's me, that's my way of looking at the world, following our own kind of drinking and whatever else, womanizing if you're into that kind of thing. So she is traumatized, she's damaged, she probably would end up in psychiatric services and care these days. But I think nothing is a coincidence, really, is it? So it's portrayed that he picks her as a kind of a cold experiment. But I think that what that suggests is that underneath this exterior of his, which is really cold and academic and clinical, and he even to himself is... I think there's a couple of things in this. He adheres to this mechanistic, materialistic, scientificist, cold world where there's no emotion in it. But I think what I was going to say is the fact that he does this because he doesn't know the girl, and he kind of tells himself it's because he wants to conduct an experiment, or sort of tells himself. I think it's left intentionally vague. It isn't explicit. It is there as part of the explanation, but it's vague. He doesn't really know why he does it. Well, the reason is he's actually a human being, somebody who's been pretty damaged himself, I reckon. So if we can explain the young girl Monica's coldness and distance due to the fact of the neglect she suffered, basically, at the hands of her father, and her mother just skipped. Now, I'm telling you, if you have patients like this, and I've retired now, very few people walk away unscathed from their mother abandoning them and the father being an irresponsible lout. Not a lout in the sense of punching people, but a posh lout in that his loutishness is expressed in drunkenness and promiscuousness, and a lack of attention to his daughter, who he has, in my view, a responsibility towards. So she's damaged. What is this man Everton's damage? Because he has a similar presentation. He is also shut down to the world, and it's not spelled out, but it is certainly a subtext, and I infer it, that he himself had some kind of damage to make him so emotionally cold and withdrawn. Okay, and I think there are things working in him that he isn't conscious of when he selects this young girl to look after as his experiment. We always used to say, I used to have, again, going back to work, have so many patients, and they'd had hard times. And I'd say, well, particularly if they were young, I'd say, well, what do you want to do with your life? I want to be a psychologist. I want to be a psychiatrist. I want to be a mental health nurse. Right. And we always used to say, what's happening there is you want to look after somebody in the way you should have been looked after. So the urge in the person is to care for somebody, to give them the care that they missed out on themselves. And I think this subconsciously is going on with Everton, who isn't a bad bloke, really. He's cold and he's snobbish, but he's not a bad bloke, as shows, I think, as we go forward. So so the supernatural story is used as I think it's used in lots of ways, but on one level, it is a vehicle to show this transformation of the character arc, because by accepting the irrational, again, almost a shadow figure, the Parson Parslow, who he thinks is nothing. He thinks he's a country bumpkin, and so he's only here because he couldn't get a better job, because everybody in the country must be stupid and have no finer feelings, so and finer understanding. So he's a second-rate man to this first-rate academic, but Parslow is the key that turns in the lock. Parslow is the one who gives him the information that opens the irrational. So what we have is the irrational world of ghosts and all the things that he's stuffed down. And then when he says at the end, there is no death, there is no death, it's almost like there is a story we haven't been told about this man. And if I were to imagine it, I would say that his parents perhaps died, and so he didn't have a nurturing upbringing, and that's his trauma. And so the fact that the dead can still have emotional contact with the living in this story, he comes to accept it, and he comes to abandon his clinical, cold, mechanistic Newtonian, although Newton was an alchemist, let's remember that. So that's where Newton's ideas of force is. The idea of a force that operates at distance, it's magic. It is an occult idea. These ideas were prevalent in Renaissance magic. And then Newton, who knows all about that, comes up with gravity. Oh no, it's science, It's an occult force. Nobody knows how it works. It's magic. Okay, I know, I'm kind of egging it a bit. I'm just winding the scientist up a little bit, because sometimes you shouldn't be too dogmatic about things. And I suppose that is my life lesson. Don't be dogmatic about things. Keep your mind open. You might be wrong. Is it Cromwell who had his faults? Not Thomas, Oliver, who said, I beseech you in the bowels of Christ to at least consider you may be wrong. Now, I may have misattributed that and misquoted it, but it's a good rule for life. Excuse me. So that was the music starting, saying that I've talked too much. So, but I think it's an interesting story in that, the loneliness, because if you close yourself down emotionally, one thing you can be guaranteed is that you will be lonely. And it takes the supernatural and I suppose the intervention of a not despised but overlooked man in the realm of Parslow the parson to turn the key. So I think that is, it's loneliness. It's about opening yourself to life. And he does that in the end, and he himself is brought back to life in some sense, a fuller life, by the ghosts, the girl ghosts, who are angels. And I thought it was quite chilling, and the vicar says, or the parson says, listen, you don't encourage Monica to be talking to ghosts, because these are lovely, these little 7 here. They're little angels, but there's other things of that ilk who aren't so easy. So she's going to go to school. And of course Monica goes into a normal life with normal children living a normal, and that has got to be a win as well. So I think this story ends up as a win-win. When I was reading it, there were 2 stories that jumped into my mind, and the first is Rudyard Kipling's They, which was published before this in 1904. I've done this story. I've done a lot now. So the story is, it's a beautiful English summer, and this guy is back from colonies, and he is driving, and he comes across this grand house, and there's I won't spoil it for you, but there are ghost children in it, and that is also a very uplifting story. So that's a very beautiful story. If you haven't heard that, They by Rudyard Kipling, listen to my version, don't listen to anybody else's, and you'll find it. Just if you Google it, you'll come across a version, They by Rudyard Kipling, but don't listen to anybody else's, because I'll be upset. And will I be upset? I won't know, to be fair. So I won't be upset. So yeah, if you want, listen to somebody else's. And then the other one, of course, is Susan Hill's The Woman in Black. So one published 20 years before, and the other published 60 years after. What is the commonality between them? Is that all 3 stories are set in these remote, grand houses. As is Turn of the Screw, of course, it's a staple, it's a Gothic staple, but not a Gothic stable. There was a different set of stories. I've got a few stories with Gothic stables in as well. But The One in Black, very different. So we have the schoolroom, don't we? And we have the dead children in all of these stories. In Playmates and they are uplifting. Whereas the Susan Hill story, The Woman in Black, which I've done a version for members. So if you want to become a member, you can listen to that. It's harrowing and evil. There's a malevolence. So I suppose we can go either way. It's it's not something to be talked about in an entertainment podcast. But the loss of a child is a profound thing. And you can understand why there's such loss, why the woman in black in the story is so full of almost hatred for the living, for what was taken from her. But let's circle round back to this story, Playmates, with a reference to they, saying, actually this is a story where there's a moral win at the end. In that, it is a bit like some of Walter de la Mare's stuff is like that, It's not like, a Deus Ex Machina happy ending. It isn't that, and they all lived happily ever after. It's not that. It's organic. It comes from the story. That's why it's so well done. You can tell this guy was a professional writer. This is a very well crafted story, in my opinion. There's nothing in it I think is flawed or extraneous or unnecessary. I think it's great. Okay, so that was that one, Playmates by A.M. Burridge. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my yatter and yattering on. Yes, see you soon. I'll speak to you soon anyway. I had some good news, by the way. I'd finished recording, and remember I lost my wallet, and oh no, it was cash in it, was all the cards, everything, driving license, my NHS identity card, and then a very lovely man came and brought it yesterday and said he'd found it on the golf course. He was a golfer, and I offered him a reward. He wouldn't take it, and he just said it's just nice to be able to do nice things. And I thought, do you know what, mate, that is absolutely right. And I am going to go forward now with that on mind, and I'm going to do something nice for somebody. I don't even know who it is or what it is I'm going to do, but I'm going to be really nice to somebody, like somebody was really nice to me yesterday. In the Tube by E.F. Benson. narrated by Tony Walker. It's a convention, said Anthony Carling cheerfully, and not a very convincing one. Time, indeed. There's no such thing as time, really. It has no actual existence. Time is nothing more than an infinitesimal point in eternity, just as space is an infinitesimal point in infinity. At the most, time is a sort of tunnel through which we're accustomed to believe that we're travelling. There's a roar in our ears and a darkness in our eyes which makes it seem real to us. But before we came into the tunnel, we existed forever in an infinite sunlight, and after we have got through it, we shall exist in an infinite sunlight again. So why should we bother ourselves about the confusion and noise and darkness which only encompass us for a moment? For a firm-rooted believer in such immeasurable ideas as these, which he punctuated with brisk application of the poker to the brave sparkle and glow of the fire, Anthony has a very pleasant appreciation of the measurable and the finite, and nobody with whom I have acquaintance has so keen a zest for life and its enjoyments as he. He had given us this evening an admirable dinner, had passed round a port beyond praise, and had illuminated the jolly hours with the light of his infectious optimism. Now the small company had melted away, and I was left with him over the fire in his study. Outside, the tattoo of wind-driven sleet was audible on the window panes, overscoring now and again the flap of the flames on the open hearth, and the thought of the chilly blasts and the snow-covered pavement in Brompton Square, across which, to skidding taxicabs, the last of his other guests had scurried, made my position, resident here till tomorrow morning, the more delicately delightful. Above all, there was this stimulating and suggestive companion, who, whether he talked of the great abstractions which were so intensely real and practical to him, or of the very remarkable experiences which he had encountered among these conventions of time and space, was equally fascinating to the listener. I adore life, he said. I find it the most entrancing plaything. It's a delightful game, and, as you know very well, the only conceivable way to play a game is to treat it extremely seriously. If you say to yourself, it's only a game, you cease to take the slightest interest in it. You have to know that it's only a game, and behave as if it was the one object of existence. I should like it to go on for many years yet, but all the time one has to be living on the true plane as well, which is eternity and infinity. If you come to think of it, the one thing which the human mind cannot grasp is the finite, not the infinite, the temporary, not the eternal. That sounds rather paradoxical, said I. Only because you've made a habit of thinking about things that seem bounded and limited. Look it in the face for a minute. Try to imagine finite time and space, and you find you can't. Go back 1,000,000 years and multiply that million of years by another million, and you find that you can't conceive of a beginning. What happened before that beginning? Another beginning, and another beginning, and before that? Look at it like that, and you find that the only solution comprehensible to you is the existence of an eternity, something that never began and will never end. It's the same about space. Project yourself to the farthest star, and what comes beyond that? Emptiness? Go on through the emptiness, and you can't imagine it being finite and having an end. It must needs go on forever. That's the only thing you can understand. There's no such thing as before or after, or beginning or end, and what a comfort that is. I should fidget myself to death if there wasn't the huge soft cushion of eternity to lean one's head against. Some people say, I believe I've heard you say it yourself, that the idea of eternity is so tiring you feel that you want to stop. But that's because you're thinking of eternity in terms of time and mumbling in your brain, and after that, and after that. Don't you grasp the idea that in eternity there isn't any after? any more than there is any before. It's all one. Eternity isn't a quantity, it's a quality. Sometimes, when Anthony talks in this manner, I seem to get a glimpse of that which to his mind is so transparently clear and solidly real. At other times, not having a brain that readily envisages abstractions, I feel as though he was pushing me over a precipice, and my intellectual faculties grasp wildly at anything tangible or comprehensible. This was the case now, and I hastily interrupted. "But there is a before and after," I said. "A few hours ago you gave us an admirable dinner, and after that, yes, after, we played bridge. And now you're going to explain things a little more clearly to me, and after that, I shall go to bed." He laughed. "You shall do exactly as you like," he said, "and you shan't be a slave to time either tonight or tomorrow morning. We won't even mention an hour for breakfast, but you shall have it in eternity, whenever you awake. And as I see it is not midnight yet, we'll slip the bonds of time and talk quite infinitely. I will stop the clock, if that will assist you in getting rid of your illusion, and then I'll tell you a story, which, to my mind, shows how unreal so-called realities are, or, at any rate, how fallacious are our senses as judges of what is real and what is not." "Something occult? Something spookish?" I asked, pricking up my ears. For Anthony has the strangest clairvoyances and visions of things unseen by the normal eye. "I suppose you might call some of it occult," he said, "though there's a certain amount of rather grim reality mixed up in it." "Go on, excellent mixture," said I. He threw a fresh log on the fire. "It's a longish story," he said. "You may stop me as soon as you've had enough, but there will come a point for which I claim your consideration. You who cling to your before and after. Has it ever occurred to you how difficult it is to say when an incident takes place? Say that a man commits some crime of violence. Can we not, with a good deal of truth, say that he really commits that crime when he definitely plans and determines upon it, dwelling on it with gusto? The actual commission of it, I think we can reasonably argue, is the mere material sequel of his resolve. He is guilty of it when he makes that determination. When, therefore, in the term of before and after, does the crime truly take place? There is also in my story a further point for your consideration, for it seems certain that the spirit of a man, after the death of his body, is obliged to reenact such a crime, with a view, I suppose we may guess, to get his remorse and his eventual redemption. Those who have second sight have seen such reenactments. Perhaps he may have done his deed blindly in this life, but then his spirit recommits it with his spiritual eyes open, and is able to comprehend its enormity. So, shall we view the man's original determination and the material commission of his crime only as preludes to the real commission of it, when with eyes unsealed he does it and repents of it? That all sounds very obscure when I speak in the abstract, but I think you'll see what I mean if you follow my tale. Comfortable? Got everything you want? Here goes then. He leaned back in his chair, concentrating his mind, and then spoke. "The story that I'm about to tell you," he said, "had its beginning a month ago when you were away in Switzerland. It reached its conclusion, so I imagine, last night. I do not, at any rate, expect to experience any more of it. Well, a month ago, I was returning late on a very wet night from dining out. There was not a taxi to be had, and I hurried through the pouring rain to the tube station at Piccadilly Circus, and thought myself very lucky to catch the last train in this direction. The carriage into which I stepped was quite empty, except for one other passenger, who sat next to the door immediately opposite to me. I had never, to my knowledge, seen him before, but I found my attention vividly fixed on him, as if he somehow concerned me. He was a man of middle age, in dress clothes, and his face wore an expression of intense thought, as if in his mind he was pondering some very significant matter, and his hand, which was resting on his knee, clenched and unclenched itself. Suddenly he looked up and stared me in the face, and I saw there suspicion and fear, as if I had surprised him in some secret deed. At that moment we stopped at Dover Street, and the conductor threw open the doors, announced the station, and added, "Change here for Hyde Park Corner and Gloucester Road." That was all right for me, since it meant that the train would stop at Brompton Road, which was my next destination. It was all right, apparently, too, for my companion, for he certainly did not get out. And after a moment's stop, during which no one else got in, we went on. I saw him, I must insist, after the doors were closed and the train had started. But when I looked again, as we rattled on, I saw that there was no one there. I was quite alone in the carriage. Now, you may think that I had had one of those swift momentary dreams which flash in and out of the mind in the space of a second. But I did not believe it was so myself, for I felt that I had experienced some sort of premonition or clairvoyant vision. A man, the semblance of whom, astral body, or whatever you may choose to call it, I had just seen, would sometimes sit in the seat opposite to me, pondering and planning. "But why?" I asked. "Why should it have been the astral body of a living man which you thought you had seen? Why not the ghost of a dead one?" "Because of my own sensations. The sight of the spirit of someone dead, which has occurred to me 2 or 3 times in my life, has always been accompanied by a physical shrinking and fear, and by the sensation of cold and of loneliness. I believed, at any rate, that I had seen a phantom of the living, and that impression was confirmed, I might say proved, the next day. For I met the man himself, and the next night, as you shall hear, I met the phantom again. We will take them in order. I was lunching then the next day with my neighbour, Mrs. Stanley. It was a small party, and when I arrived, we waited but for the final guest. He entered while I was talking to some friend, and presently at my elbow I heard Mrs. Stanley's voice. "Let me introduce you to Sir Henry Pale," she said. I turned and saw my vis-a-vis of the night before. It was quite unmistakably he, and as we shook hands, he looked at me, I thought, with vague and puzzled recognition. "Haven't we met before, Mr. Carling?" he said. I seem to recollect." For the moment I forgot the strange manner of his disappearance from the carriage, and thought that it had been the man himself who I had seen last night. "Surely, and not so long ago," I said, "for we sat opposite each other in the last tube train from Piccadilly Circus yesterday night." He still looked at me, frowning, puzzled, and shook his head. "That can hardly be," he said. "I only came up from the country this morning." Now this interested me profoundly, for the astral body, we are told, abides in some half-conscious region of the mind, and has recollections of what has happened to it, which it can convey only very vaguely and dimly to the conscious mind. All lunchtime, I could see his eyes again and again directed to me, with the same puzzled and perplexed air, and as I was taking my departure, he came up to me. "I shall recollect some day," he said, "where we met before, and I hope we may meet again. Was it not—" And he stopped. "No, it's gone from me," he added. The log that Anthony had thrown on the fire was burning bravely now, and its high flickering flame lit up his face. "Now, I don't know whether you believe in coincidences as chance things," he said, "but if you do, get rid of the notion. Or if you can't at once, call it a coincidence that that very night I again caught the last train on the tube going westwards. This time, so far from my being a solitary passenger, there was a considerable crowd waiting at Dover Street where I entered, and just as the noise of the approaching train began to reverberate in the tunnel, I caught sight of Sir Henry Pale standing near the opening from which the train would presently emerge, apart from the rest of the crowd. And I thought to myself how odd it was that I should have seen the phantom of him at this very hour last night, and the man himself now. And I began walking towards him with the vague idea of saying, "Anyhow, it's in the tube that we meet tonight." And then a terrible and awful thing happened. Just as the train emerged from the tunnel, he jumped down on the line in front of it, and the train swept along over him up the platform. For a moment I was stricken with horror at the sight, and I remember covering my eyes against the dreadful tragedy. But then I perceived that, though it had taken place in full sight of those who were waiting, no one seemed to have seen it, except myself. The driver, looking out from his window, had not applied his brakes. There was no jolt from the advancing train, no scream, no cry, and the rest of the passengers began boarding the train with perfect nonchalance. I must have staggered, for I felt sick and faint with what I had seen, and some kindly soul put his arm around me and supported me into the train. He was a doctor, he told me, and asked if I was in pain or what ailed me. I told him what I thought I had seen, and he assured me that no such accident had taken place. It was clear then to my own mind that I had seen the second act, so to speak, in this psychical drama, and I pondered next morning over the problem as to what I should do. Already I had glanced at the morning paper, which, as I knew would be the case, contained no mention whatever of what I had seen. The thing had certainly not happened, but I knew in myself that it would happen. The flimsy veil of time had been withdrawn from my eyes, and I had seen into what you would call the future. In terms of time, of course, it was the future, but from my point of view, the thing was just as much in the past as it was in the future. It existed and waited only for its material fulfillment. The more I thought about it, the more I saw that I could do nothing. I interrupted his narrative. "You did nothing," I exclaimed. "Surely you might have taken some step in order to try to avert the tragedy." He shook his head. "What step, precisely?" he said. "Was I to go to Sir Henry and tell him that once more I had seen him in the tube, in the act of committing suicide? Look at it like this. Either what I had seen was pure illusion, pure imagination, in which case it had no existence or significance at all, or it was actual and real, and essentially it had happened. Or take it, though not very logically, somewhere between the two. Say that the idea of suicide, for some cause of which I knew nothing, had occurred to him, or would occur. Should I not, if that was the case, be doing a very dangerous thing by making such a suggestion to him? Might not the fact of my telling him what I had seen put the idea into his mind, or, if it was already there, confirm it and strengthen it? It's a ticklish matter to play with souls, as Browning says. But it seems so inhuman not to interfere in any way, said I. Not to make an attempt. What interference? Asked he. What attempt? The human instinct in me still seemed to cry aloud at the thought of doing nothing to avert such a tragedy. But it seemed to be beating itself against something austere and inexorable. And cudgel my brain as I would, I could not combat the sense of what he had said. I had no answer for him, and he went on. "You must recollect too," he said, "that I believed then and believe now that the thing had happened. The cause of it, whatever that was, had begun to work, and the effect in this material sphere was inevitable. That is what I alluded to when, at the beginning of my story, I asked you to consider how difficult it was to say when an action took place. You still hold that this particular action, this suicide of Sir Henry, had not yet taken place, because he had not yet thrown himself under the advancing train. To me, that seems a materialistic view. I hold that in all but the endorsement of it, so to speak, it had taken place. I fancy that Sir Henry, for instance, now free from the material dusks, knows that himself." Exactly as he spoke, there swept through the warm-lit room a current of ice-cold air, ruffling my hair as it passed me, and making the wood flames on the hearth to dwindle and flare. I looked round to see if the door at my back had opened, but nothing stirred there, and over the closed window the curtains were fully drawn. As it reached Anthony, he sat up quickly in his chair and directed his glance this way and that about the room. "Did you feel that?" he asked. "Yes, a sudden draft," I said. "Ice cold. Anything else? Any other sensation?" I paused before I answered, for at the moment there occurred to me Anthony's differentiation of the effects produced on the beholder by a phantasm of the living and the apparition of the dead. It was the latter which accurately described my sensation now, a certain physical shrinking, a fear, a feeling of desolation. But yet, I had seen nothing. "I felt rather creepy," I said. As I spoke, I drew my chair rather closer to the fire and sent a swift and, I confess, a somewhat apprehensive scrutiny round the walls of the brightly lit room. I noticed at the same time that Anthony was peering across to the chimney-piece, on which, just below a sconce holding 2 electric lights, stood the clock which at the beginning of our talk he had offered to stop. The hands, I noticed, pointed to 25 minutes to 1. "But you saw nothing?" he asked. "Nothing whatever," I said. "Why should I? What was there to see? Or did you?" "I don't think so," he said. Somehow this answer got on my nerves, for the queer feeling which had accompanied that cold current of air had not left me. If anything, it had become more acute. "But surely you know whether you saw anything or not," I said. "One can't always be certain," said he. "I say that I don't think I saw anything, but I'm not sure either whether the story I'm telling you was quite concluded last night. I think there may be a further incident. If you prefer it, I will leave the rest of it, as far as I know it, unfinished till tomorrow morning, and you can go off to bed now." His complete calmness and tranquillity reassured me. "But why should I do that?" I asked. Again he looked round on the bright walls. "Well, I think something entered the room just now," he said, "and it may develop. If you don't like the notion, you had better go. Of course, there's nothing to be alarmed at. Whatever it is, it can't hurt us. But it is close on the hour when, on 2 successive nights, I saw what I have already told you, and an apparition usually occurs at the same time. Why that is so, I cannot say, but certainly it looks as if a spirit that is earthbound is still subject to a certain convention, the convention of time, for instance. I think that personally I shall see something before long, but most likely you won't. You're not such a sufferer as I from these delusions." I was frightened, and I knew it, but I was also intensely interested, and some perverse pride wriggled within me at his last words. Why, so I asked myself, shouldn't I see whatever was to be seen? "I don't want to go in the least," I said. "I want to hear the rest of your story." Where was I then? Ah, yes. You were wondering why I didn't do something after I saw the train move up to the platform, and I said that there was nothing to be done. If you think it over, I fancy you'll agree with me. A couple of days passed, and on the 3rd morning I saw in the paper that there had come fulfilment to my vision. Sir Henry Pale, who had been waiting on the platform of Dover Street Station for the last train to South Kensington, had thrown himself in front of it as it came into the station. The train had been pulled up in a couple of yards, but a wheel had passed over his chest, crushing it in and instantly killing him. An inquest was held, and there emerged at it one of those dark stories which, on occasions like these, sometimes fall like a midnight shadow across a life that the world perhaps had thought prosperous. He had long been on bad terms with his wife, from whom he had lived apart, and it appeared that not long before this he had fallen desperately in love with another woman. The night before his suicide, he had appeared very late at his wife's house and had a long and angry scene with her, in which he entreated her to divorce him, threatening otherwise to make her life a hell to her. She refused, and in an ungovernable fit of passion, he attempted to strangle her. There was a struggle, and the noise of it caused her manservant to come up, who succeeded in overmastering him. Lady Pale threatened to proceed against him for assault with the intention to murder her. With this hanging over his head the next night, as I have already told you, he committed suicide. He glanced at the clock again, and I saw that the hands now pointed to 10 minutes to 1. The fire was beginning to burn low, and the room surely was growing strangely cold. "That's not quite all," said Anthony, again looking around. "Are you sure you wouldn't prefer to hear it tomorrow?" The mixture of shame and pride and curiosity again prevailed. "No, tell me the rest of it at once," I said. Before speaking, he peered suddenly at some point behind my chair, shading his eyes. I followed his glance and knew what he meant by saying that sometimes one could not be sure whether one saw something or not. But was that an outline shadow that intervened between me and the wall? It was difficult to focus. I did not know whether it was near the wall or near my chair. It seemed to clear anyhow as I looked more closely at it. "You see nothing?" asked Anthony. "No, I don't think so," said I. "And you?" "I think I do," he said, and his eyes followed something which was invisible to mine. They came to rest between him and the chimney-piece. Looking steadily there, he spoke again. "All this happened some weeks ago," he said, "when you were out in Switzerland, and since then, up till last night, I saw nothing further. But all the time, I was expecting something further. I felt that as far as I was concerned, it was not all over yet. And last night, with the intention of assisting any communication to come through to me from beyond, I went into the Dover Street tube station at a few minutes before 1 o'clock, the hour at which both the assault and the suicide had taken place. The platform when I arrived on it was absolutely empty, or appeared to be so. But presently, just as I began to hear the roar of the approaching train, I saw there was the figure of a man standing some 20 yards from me, looking into the tunnel. He had not come down with me in the lift, and the moment before, he had not been there. He began moving towards me, and then I saw who it was, and I felt a stir of wind, icy cold, coming towards me as he approached. It was not the draught that heralds the approach of a train, for it came from the opposite direction. He came close up to me, and I saw there was recognition in his eyes. He raised his face towards me, and I saw his lips move, but perhaps in the increasing noise from the tunnel, I heard nothing come from them. He put out his hand as if entreating me to do something, and with a cowardice for which I cannot forgive myself, I shrank from him, for I knew by the sign that I have told you that this was one from the dead, and my flesh quaked before him, drowning for the moment all pity and all desire to help him, if that was possible. Certainly he had something which he wanted of me, but I recoiled from him, and by now the train was emerging from the tunnel, and next moment, with a dreadful gesture of despair, he threw himself in front of it. As he finished speaking, he got up quickly from his chair, still looking fixedly in front of him. I saw his pupils dilate and his mouth worked. "It is coming," he said. "I am to be given a chance of atoning for my cowardice. There is nothing to be afraid of. I must remember that myself." As he spoke, there came from the panelling above the chimney-piece one loud, shattering crack, and the cold wind again circled above my head. I found myself shrinking back in my chair with my hands held in front of me, as if instinctively I screened myself against something which I knew was there, but which I could not see. Every sense told me that there was a presence in the room other than mine and Antony's, and the horror of it was that I could not see it. Any vision, however terrible, would, I felt, be more tolerable than this clear, certain knowledge that close to me was this invisible thing. And yet, what horror might not be disclosed of the face of the dead and the crushed chest? But all I could see, as I shuddered in this cold wind, was the familiar walls of the room, and Antony standing in front of me, stiff and firm, making, as I knew, a call on his courage. His eyes were focused on something quite close to him, and some semblance of a smile quivered on his mouth, and then he spoke again. "Yes, I know you," he said, "and you want something of me. Tell me then what it is." There was absolute silence, but what was silence to my ears could not have been so to his, for once or twice he nodded, and once he said, "Yes, I see. I will do it." And with the knowledge that, even as there was someone here whom I could not see, so there was speech going on which I could not hear, this terror of the dead and of the unknown rose in me with the sense of powerlessness to move that accompanies nightmare. I could not stir, I could not speak. I could only strain my ears for the inaudible and my eyes for the unseen, while the cold wind from the very valley of the shadow of death streamed over me. It was not that the presence of death itself was terrible. It was that from its tranquility and serene keeping there had been driven some unquiet soul, unable to rest in peace for whatever ultimate awakening rouses the countless generations of those who have passed away, driven no less from whatever activities are theirs, back into the material world from which it should have been delivered. Never until the gulf between the living and the dead was thus bridged had it seemed so immense and so unnatural. It is possible that the dead may have communication with the living, and it was not that exactly that so terrified me. For such communication as we know it comes voluntarily from them. But here was something icy cold and crime-laden that was chased back from the peace that would not pacify it. And then, most horrible of all, there came a change in these unseen conditions. Antony was silent now, and from looking straight and fixedly in front of him, he began to glance sideways to where I sat and back again. And with that, I felt that the unseen presence had turned its attention from him to me. And now, too, gradually, and by awful degrees, I began to see. There came an outline of shadow across the chimney piece and the panels above it. It took shape. It fashioned itself into the outline of a man. Within the shape of the shadow, details began to form themselves, and I saw, wavering in the air, like something concealed by haze, the semblance of a face, stricken and tragic, and burdened with such a weight of woe as no human face had ever worn. Next, the shoulders outlined themselves, and a stain, livid and red, spread out below them, and suddenly the vision leaped into clearness. There he stood, the chest crushed in and drowned in the red stain, from which broken ribs, like the bones of a wrecked ship, protruded. The mournful, terrible eyes were fixed on me. And it was from them, so I knew, that the bitter wind proceeded. Then, quick as the switching off of a lamp, the spectre vanished, and the bitter wind was still. And opposite to me stood Anthony in a quiet, bright-lit room. There was no sense of an unseen presence anymore. He and I were there alone, with an interrupted conversation still dangling between us in the warm air. I came round to that as one comes round after an anaesthetic. It all swam into sight again, unreal at first, and gradually assuming the texture of actuality. You were talking to somebody. Not to me, I said. Who was it? What was it? He passed the back of his hand across his forehead, which glistened in the light. A soul in hell, he said. Now, it is hard ever to recall mere physical sensations when they have passed. If you have been cold and are warmed, it is difficult to remember what cold was like. If you have been hot and have got cool, it is difficult to realize what the oppression of heat really meant. Just so with the passing of that presence. I found myself unable to recapture the sense of the terror with which, a few moments ago only, it had invaded and inspired me. A soul in hell, I said. What are you talking about? He moved about the room for a minute or so, and then came and sat on the arm of my chair. I don't know what you saw, he said, or what you felt, but there has never in all my life happened to me anything more real than what these last few minutes have brought. I have talked to a soul in the hell of remorse, which is the only possible hell. He knew from what happened last night that he could perhaps establish communication through me with the world he had quitted, and he sought me and found me. I am charged with a mission to a woman I have never seen, the message from the contrite. You can guess who it is. He got up with a sudden briskness. Let's verify it anyhow, he said. He gave me the street and the number. There's a telephone book. Would it be a coincidence merely if I found that at number 20 in Chasemore Street, South Kensington, there lived a Lady Pale? He turned over the leaves of the bulky volume. Yes, that's right, he said.
Everybody dies, and everybody dies. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back?
So that was In the Tube by E.F. Benson, and now's the part of the podcast when I talk about the story. I say something about the themes of the story in my response to it, and maybe fill in some biographical or factual details. For those of you who don't want that, who just want story after story, on the YouTube channel there are playlists. There are two playlists really. One is called Sleep Stories, because I think mainly people use the long successions of stories to sleep to, and the second one is full audiobooks, and we've got things like Dracula, of course, Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, a load, hours and hours and hours. So they don't have any commentaries, and they don't have any ads apart from beginning and end. I need to earn something somehow. And if you don't want the stories ad free, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Barcud, BARCUD, that's me, and you'll find then you get all the stories. You get early access to the stories, a week at least, and then every month you get a members only story, and I think that's the $5 a month one, and then you can download all of the stories ever done and do with them. So that's my little sales thing there. But if you want to hear what I want to think about the story, what I think about the story, please listen on. If not, stop. So it was written by E.F. Benson. published in 1922, December 1922, in Hutchinson's magazine, subsequently included in Benson's collection of short stories titled Visible and Invisible. It was later featured in the 1983 anthology Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories, curated by Roald Dahl. If we get time, I'll talk. This is where I got the story. It's sitting on my desk. I was reading it from my lectern, my plastic lectern, so you may have heard the pages turn. You may have heard some other things as well. It's a very noisy place, this. There's the scrap man, there's the people, the boys with their motorbikes in the park, there are the dogs in the park, there are apparently thousands of emergency crises with police and ambulances and everything rushing up and down the road. So you may have heard all of that, or I hope very little. Dogs, my dogs, wrestling downstairs. There may be some more of that. Okay, that's where the story is situated, that's where I got it. Edward, biography of the man himself. We've done many E.F. Benson stories before. Edward Frederick Benson, OBE, born 24th July 1867, died 29th of February 1940. He was very versatile. He was born at Wellington College in Berkshire. He had two author brothers as well, and a sister who was a painter, I think. His father became Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church, and was very interested in ghosts himself. I think he formed the Cambridge Ghost Club. I do know these things, and I think it was the Cambridge Ghost Club. So he was actually born E.F. Edward Frederick was born at Wellington College, and I think his father, Edward White, who became, as we said, Archbishop of Canterbury, was employed there at the time. Benson himself, younger, this one we're talking about, was educated at Marlborough College and King's College, Cambridge. Was that not the same college as M.R. James? He is best remembered for his Map and Lucia comic novels, which satirically depicted life in an English village, as well as his numerous ghost stories, which we know him for, of course. Let's think about the tube. Central theme, clearly. So the structure of the story is, and you find this with Benson, there's one called Between the Lights as well. And there's a little bit of a philosophical preamble. And when I come into that, I think, oh, here we go. If I want to read philosophical preamble, I'll read a book about philosophy. There we go. And it's about Anthony Carling's ideas of time. But then we see how it's actually relevant to the story. And the story itself of the ghost, which appears 3 times to him. Very important, and repetition, isn't it? I think that's, of course, the cock that crows 3 times, but also the ghosts appear to, in Dickens, certainly, on A Christmas Carol, they appear 3 times as well. And each time, in a sense, Carling fails to do something. The first time he fails to understand what's going on. The second time, when there is the ghost that jumps, he fails to do anything about it, to stop it. And the third time, the ghost has a message for him, a request for him, and he shrinks back. So he fails it 3 times. I think that's really important. Well, really important, you know what I mean? It's important-ish. So Carling has a version of eternalism. So there are various views about what time really is. If you notice, the only time that we have is now. The past is imaginary, in that it is just a mental image, and the future is imaginary. They are different. One appears more fixed than the others, although we know that memories are actually malleable. We forget things, but also our memories. There are psychological experiments that show this. Our memories are we can change them by. There was an experiment, a Dutch experiment, whereby they would say, "Can you describe what happened when the red car was involved in a smash?" And then they use different words: a wreck, a smash, a collision. And each time the memory becomes more violent in line with the word. And I think they suggest the colours sometimes as well, when the people misremember their colours. So our grasp on the past is pretty tenuous. Our grasp on the future is even more so, I suppose. There are different views of it. So there is this idea that we're going along, this is most commonly held, that we're going along a thread, aren't we, from past to present. Not every civilization has believed that, but we have the eternalism, which is like the block universe, that all points in time and space the block universe is a four-dimensional space, but eternalism at all points are equally real. So an evening in Melbourne, Australia in 1932 is as real as what's happening to me now. It's just in the sense of a TV or a radio receiver. I don't have the apparatus, as my New Zealand physics teacher used to say, to see it, to pick that up, that scene. I'm not there. I can't even pick up what's happening. I lost my wallet this morning, by the way. I wasn't going to mention that. I went out walking the dogs, and when I came back, the wallet was gone from my shorts pocket. And I had walked back, I couldn't find it. So, my wallet is somewhere. I can't find, it's somewhere now, but I can't access it. D-Day 1944 is real, but I can't access it. The future is real. So that's the block universe, and that's eternalism, and that's pretty much what Anthony Carling's saying. Presentism is the opposite of eternalism. So eternalism, the block universe, Anthony Carling's view, everything is here now, we just can't pick it up. But presentism is that the sum of existence grows as time proceeds. So the future is inchoate, it is nothing, it is raw stuff. And as the arrow of time, or the line of time proceeds, more is created. So more world, more experience is being created. That which was not experienced is now created. Now, I go between the two of those really. Yeah, and I actually don't think too much about it unless I'm prompted to say it. You'll see in some of my stories, The Ghost of Christmas Past I wrote is a kind of eternalism, or quantum holism. Let's not even go there. It's a kind of version of anyway, we won't go into quantum holism. Look it up. You're all intrigued now, aren't you? So quantum holism is that everything is, like a hologram. Every piece of information is in every part of it. Yeah. And so that's a version of presentism that takes into account this kind of idea of quantum stuff. Anyway, so let's get back to the story. So this is his view, and this raises some really interesting, and I think this is the crux of the story. This raises some really interesting questions about free will and determinism. At one point, Carling seems to be saying, for most of the story, our interlocutor, says to him, well, didn't you do anything? And he says, well, what can I do? It's real. It's already happened. How can I change that? So that is his explicit view. And he says that, doesn't he? There's no point trying to change it. It's already happened. Even if it's in the future, it's still happened. And as it's in the past, it's happened, Most of us who have a conventional view of free will think we only have free will in the future. But actually, as the story proceeds, the suicide is in the past. But it's still going to be changed in some way. Maybe not the events, but the emotional charge is going to be changed. And that is kind of redemption. I remember that his father was a prominent Christian bishop. So I can imagine there may have been theological... And his brother became a Catholic priest, I think. There may have been theological discussions around the dinner table. What if... And I think this is close to a theologically Christian point of view, that I think Christ's redemption, according to Christian theology, redeemed all things for all time, both in the future for the people who are yet to be born, but also for the people who had been born before him. I believe that's the position there. So, and that's kind of contrary to most of our common sense feeling of free will. We feel we can change the future, but certainly not the past. Whereas I think, if I'm correct, the Christian doctrine says, no, Christ certainly, or God, can change the past. And this story, I think, raises the possibility that the past can be changed, if not in occurrence, I've said this before, but in morality. That is what redemption's about, isn't it? Redeeming what you did in the past. So what was done in wickedness in the past is redeemed, and it is no longer wicked because you have atoned for it. Yeah? It is theological, isn't it? So 3 times he sees the ghost, and his view for most of the story is, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? But if we take the view that he could do something, then he's failed the ghost 3 times. And the ghost comes to him and he shrinks back in fear. Now, when the apparition comes into the room, he's given another opportunity. And he recognises his cowardice. Now, he's changed his tune, because in the first part, there was nothing he could do. So it's not cowardly not to do anything. To do something you can't, or not to do something that is impossible. That doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean. It isn't an act of cowardice. It can't be done. It simply can't be done. So you're neither brave nor cowardly for not doing it. Is just a fact. But as the story proceeds and the ghost comes in, so he has this intellectual view of presentism, but his emotional response, his emotions of cowardice are not. They don't tally with that, because his body, or his whatever feels his emotions, doesn't believe what his mind is saying about there being no free will ultimately, because everything's already done in the block universe. He believes he is. His behaviour betrays the fact that he feels guilty for his cowardice. Therefore, he must believe at some level, or feel at some level. He could, not only he could, but he should, because there's moral injunctions in this as well. So, he at the very end, he redeems himself by making up for his previous cowardice and doing the thing which he's frightened of, but contacting the ex-wife to say that the spirit of her husband is full of remorse and guilt for attempting to murder her, which is reasonable. And so, in that act of facing his own cowardice and redeeming himself, he redeems, if she accepts the ghost's appeal, he redeems the ghost as well. He redeems the ghost's guilt as well, and he redeems it in the past. See what I'm saying? I hope you're with me. I think it's quite complex, but and that's why I think it's a good story. It's a good story because it deals with those really important issues and makes you think. And why also it's a good story, particularly I thought, the descriptions of the tube, the material descriptions, the physical descriptions of the tube and being on the tube. You were there, weren't you? That was really well done. You were there in that tube station. He managed to do that. And then when the apparition comes into the room with him, and there's the details of the logs on the fire, the cold, the chimney piece, all of these things, and the emotional reaction of our interlocutor particularly, who is frightened, I think he manages to generate fear. So I think he does 2 things. I think he deals with an interesting philosophical issue, but he also, it's not dry bones philosophical either. It's real. It's about guilt. It's about remorse. It's about courage. It's a real practical lesson for us. But he also manages to tell a rattling story and how do you tell a rattling story? Simple. You, first of all, create a scenario whereby the listener, the reader, is attached to, the character is an avatar of them. They are living in the story. It's almost happening to them. They're feeling the emotions through the eyes of the protagonist. To do that, you have to get them to care about the protagonist. And I think he manages to do that in short order, really. We have a basic human sympathy for other people, most of us, so it isn't that hard to do in general terms. But he does it. And then the second is through the use of description to put us there emotionally. So we've got to care about them, to care what happens to them. And then the second skill is through the use of language and description, to put us there. I was reading something about Tolstoy. Let me look that up. That was really interesting. Let me see what that was, what the Tolstoy said. So I got this from an article from Philosophy Today. So Leo Tolstoy, Russian author and thinker, 1828 to 1910, said, "Art is a human activity consisting in this, that one person consciously, by certain external signs, conveys to others feelings he has experienced, and other people are affected by these feelings and live them over in themselves, and then later intentionally recreated experiences and emotions communicated by the author to the reader for the purpose of the reader having an illusory similar experience. In other words, art intends to imitate a feeling and pass it along." That's that, isn't it? So I think he does that with air. That's great art. That is how stories work. That's how all art works. The author communicates feelings, imagines or has the experience of being in the tube station seeing the ghost with all those issues, and passes them on to us so that we feel them too. If we don't feel them, it doesn't work. If we go, this is rubbish, I'm not interested, it doesn't work. But I think this did work. And what do I have to say more? I don't have any more to say about this story. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed my ruminations as much as I enjoyed ruminating. One of the reasons I'm going to stop is the dogs are carrying on now. It's about time for us to go and look, just in case the wallet is nestled in the long grass. But I might have to put that down to experience. I haven't got any cards or any cash or anything now. They will be replaced, but at the moment I can't buy anything, which actually probably isn't a bad thing. But I was looking for, you can buy these little cards that you put in your wallet that you can track them, they can make a noise when you beep them, and you can track them on your if you've got an iPhone, Find My thingy. So I was going to buy one of those. I was thinking, well, it's probably worth it, but then I can't buy anything because all my cards, I blocked them all, so nobody's going to steal my money. It's a funny old world, isn't it? Anyway, I found 2 golf balls though to make up for it on the golf course. They're worth this bloke told me they're worth £5 each, but I don't think they are, about £1.20 each. Anyway, I hope you're all well. I hope you enjoyed the story I did. Oh yeah, I forgot something, as I always do. Do you remember I did this channel called Late Night Talk Radio, it was, and Late Night Sleep Radio, and it was basically me talking like this, rambling a bit, but talking about folklore, customs, legends, just facts like ochre pigments and fell ponies and things. I've got all these books and I have to justify them. And so I did about 15 episodes, and people who liked them, loved them. But there wasn't many people, and I thought, I can't read. And I had a break for about 7 or 8 months. And then people were like, really, please do some more. And I'm like, do you know what? I spend a day a week doing them, and I earn £4 a month from them. It's not really viable because I'm doing this for a living now. And then I thought, well, I'll tell you what, this is weird because people really like them, these episodes, and yet not many people tune in. So what's going on? I thought, well, it's probably a marketing problem. So I've had a think, and I think it's called Dreamy Isles Tales now. But then I've had another think, and when I can change it again, I'm going to probably change it to Sleepy Folklore. So I've done one recently, last week. I'm going to do another. We talked about May Day customs and the flowers and fences and fell ponies, and I did a story from a book called Lost and Found as a bedtime story, and the purpose of it is you fall asleep. So if you fancy that, it's going to be, if you go on YouTube to the channel here, which is Classic Ghost Stories, and you look at the bottom, you'll see a link. There's channels we like, and that's my channel. It's called Dreamy Isles Tales now. It's available as a podcast as well through Spotify and Apple and everybody. But it might be called Late Night Sleep Radio, and that I'm halfway through rebranding. I know you shouldn't do that, but I'm an amateur. And don't it show? Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant, first published in 1890. My God, I'm going to write down at last what has happened to me. But how dare I? The thing is so bizarre, so inexplicable, so incomprehensible, so silly. If I were not perfectly sure of what I have seen, sure that there was not in my reasoning any defect, any error in my declarations, any lacuna in the inflexible sequence of my observations, I should believe myself to be the dupe of a simple hallucination, the sport of a singular vision. After all, who knows? Yesterday, I was in a private asylum, but I went there voluntarily out of prudence and fear. Only one single human being knows my history, and that is the doctor of the said asylum. I'm going to write to him. I really do not know why. To disembarrass myself?
Yes, I feel as though weighed down by an intolerable nightmare. Let me explain. I have always been a recluse, a dreamer, a kind of isolated philosopher, easygoing, content with but little, harbouring ill feeling against no man, and without even a grudge against heaven. I have constantly lived alone. Consequently, a kind of torture takes hold of me when I find myself in the presence of others. How is this to be explained? I do not know. I'm not averse to going out into the world, to conversation, to dining with friends. But when they are near me for any length of time, even the most intimate of them, they bore me, fatigue me, enervate me, and I experience an overwhelming, torturing desire to see them get up and go, to take themselves away, and to leave me by myself. That desire is more than a craving, it is an irresistible necessity. And if the presence of people with whom I find myself were to be continued, if I were compelled not only to listen, but also to follow for any length of time their conversation, a serious accident would assuredly take place. What kind of accident? Who knows? Perhaps a slight paralytic stroke. Probably. I like solitude so much that I cannot even endure the vicinage of other beings sleeping under the same roof. I cannot live in Paris, because there I suffer the most acute agony. I lead a moral life, and am therefore tortured in body and in nerves by that immense crowd which swarms and lives even when it sleeps. The sleeping of others is more painful still than their conversation, and I can never find repose when I know and feel that on the other side of a wall several existences are undergoing these regular eclipses of reason. Why am I thus? Who knows? The cause of it's very simple, perhaps. I get tired very soon of everything that does not emanate from me, and there are many people in similar case. We are on earth two distinct races, those who have need of others, whom others amuse, engage, soothe, whom solitude harasses, pains, stupefies, like the movement of a terrible glacier or the traversing of the desert, and those, on the contrary, whom others weary, tire, bore, silently torture, whom isolation calms and bathes in the repose of independency and plunges into the humours of their own thoughts. In fine, there is here a normal physical phenomenon. Some are constituted to live a life outside of themselves, others to live a life within themselves. As for me, my exterior associations are abruptly and painfully short-lived, and as they reach their limits, I experience in my whole body and in my whole intelligence an intolerable uneasiness. As a result of this, I became attached, or rather had become much attached, to inanimate objects, which have for me the importance of beings, and my house has or had become a world in which I lived an active and solitary life, surrounded by all manner of things, furniture, familiar knickknacks, as sympathetic in my eyes as the visages of human beings. I had filled my mansion with them, little by little. I adorned it with them, and I felt an inward content and satisfaction, was more happy than if I had been in the arms of a beloved girl whose wonted caresses had become a soothing and delightful necessity. I had had this house constructed in the centre of a beautiful garden, which hid it from the public highways, and which was near the entrance to a city where I could find, on occasion, the resources of society, for which at moments I had a longing. All my domestics slept in a separate building, which was situated at some considerable distance from my house, at the far end of the kitchen garden, which in turn was surrounded by a high wall. The obscure envelopment of night, in the silence of my concealed habitation, buried under the leaves of great trees, were so reposeful and so delicious that before retiring to my couch, I lingered every evening several hours in order to enjoy the solitude a little longer. One day, Signad had been playing at one of the city theatres. It was the first time that I'd listened to that beautiful musical and fairy-like drama, and I had derived from it the liveliest pleasures. I returned home on foot with a light step, my head full of sonorous phrases, and my mind haunted by delightful visions. It was night, the dead of night, and so dark that I could hardly distinguish the broad highway, and consequently I stumbled into the ditch more than once. From the custom house at the barriers to my house was about a mile, perhaps a little more, a leisurely walk of about 20 minutes. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock or maybe 1:30. The sky had by this time cleared somewhat, and the crescent appeared, the gloomy crescent of the last quarter of the moon. The crescent of the first quarter is that which rises about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and is clear, gay, and fretted with silver. But the one which rises after midnight is reddish, sad, and desolating. It is the true Sabbath crescent. Every prowler by night has made the same observation. The first, though slender as a thread, throws a faint, joyous light which rejoices the heart and lines the ground with distinct shadows. The last sheds hardly a dying glimmer, and is so wan that it occasions hardly any shadows. In the distance, I perceived the sombre mass of my garden, and, I know not why, was seized with a feeling of uneasiness at the idea of going inside. I slackened my pace, and walked very softly, the thick cluster of trees having the appearance of a tomb in which my house was buried. I opened my outer gate, and entered the long avenue of sycamores which ran in the direction of the house, arranged vault-wise like a high tunnel, traversing opaque masses, and winding round the turf lawns, on which baskets of flowers in the pale darkness could be indistinctly discerned. While approaching the house, I was seized by a strange feeling. I could hear nothing. I stood still. Through the trees there wasn't even a breath of air stirring. "What's the matter with me?" I said to myself. For 10 years I had entered and re-entered in the same way, without ever experiencing the least inquietude. I never had any fear at night. The sight of a man, a marauder or a thief would have thrown me into a fit of anger, and I would have rushed at him without any hesitation. Moreover, I was armed. I had my revolver, but I didn't touch it, for I was anxious to resist that feeling of dread with which I was seized. What was it? Was it a presentiment, that mysterious presentiment which takes hold of the senses of men who have witnessed something which, to them, is inexplicable? Perhaps. Who knows? In proportion as I advanced, I felt my skin quiver more and more, and when I was close to the wall, near the outhouses of my large residence, I felt that it would be necessary for me to wait a few minutes before opening the door and going inside. I sat down then on a bench under the windows of my drawing room. I rested there, a little disturbed, with my head leaning against the wall, my eyes wide open under the shade of the foliage. For the first few minutes, I didn't observe anything unusual around me. I had a humming noise in my ears, but that has happened often to me. Sometimes it seemed to me that I heard trains passing, that I heard clocks striking, that I heard a multitude on the march. Very soon, those humming noises became more distinct, more concentrated, more determinable. I was deceiving myself. It was not the ordinary tingling of my arteries which transmitted to my ears these rumbling sounds, but it was a very distinct, though confused noise, which came without any doubt whatever from the interior of my house. Through the walls I distinguished this continued noise. I should rather say agitation than noise, an indistinct moving about of a pile of things, as if people were tossing about, displacing and carrying away surreptitiously all my furniture. I doubted, however, for some considerable time yet the evidence of my ears, but having placed my ear against one of the outhouses, the better to discover what that strange disturbance was inside my house, I became convinced, certain, that something was taking place in my residence which was altogether abnormal and incomprehensible. I had no fear, but I was, how shall I express it, paralyzed by astonishment. I didn't draw my revolver, knowing very well that there was no need of my doing so. I listened a long time, but could come to no resolution, my mind being quite clear, though in myself I was naturally anxious. I got up and waited, listening always to the noise, which gradually increased, and at intervals grew very loud, and which seemed to become an impatient, angry disturbance, a mysterious commotion. Then, suddenly ashamed at my timidity, I seized my bunch of keys. I selected the one I wanted, guided it into the lock, turned it twice, and pushing the door with all my might, sent it banging against the partition. The collision sounded like the report of a gun, and I responded to that explosive noise from roof to basement of my residence, a formidable tumult. It was so sudden, so terrible, so deafening, that I recoiled a few steps, and though I knew it to be wholly useless, I pulled my revolver out of its case. I continued to listen for some time longer. I could distinguish now an extraordinary pattering upon the steps of my grand staircase, on the waxed floors, on the carpets, not of boots or of naked feet, but of iron and wooden crutches which resounded like cymbals. Then I suddenly discerned, on the threshold of my door, an armchair, my large reading easy chair, which set off waddling. It went away through my garden. Others followed it, those of my drawing room, then my sofas dragging themselves along like crocodiles on their short paws, then all my chairs bounding like goats, and the little footstools hopping like rabbits. Oh, what a sensation! I slunk back into a clump of bushes, where I remained crouched up, watching meanwhile my furniture defile past, for everything walked away, the one behind the other, briskly or slowly according to its weight or size. My piano, my grand piano, bounded past with the gallop of a horse and a murmur of music in its sides. The smaller articles slid along the gravel, and the rest of my furniture, which followed it, began to march over me, tramping on my legs and injuring them. When I loosed my hold, other articles had passed over my body, just as a charge of cavalry does over the body of a dismounted soldier. Seized at last with terror, I succeeded in dragging myself out of the main avenue, and in concealing myself again among the shrubbery, so as to watch the disappearance of the most cherished objects, the smallest, the least striking, the least unknown, which had once belonged to me. I then heard in the distance noises which came from my apartments, which sounded now as if the house were empty, a loud noise of shutting of doors. They were being slammed from top to bottom of my dwelling, even the door which I had just opened myself unconsciously, and which had closed of itself when the last thing had taken its departure. I took flight also, running toward the city, and only regaining my self-composure on reaching the boulevards, where I met belated people. I rang the bell of a hotel where I was known. I had knocked the dust off my clothes with my hands, and I told the porter that I had lost my bunch of keys, which included also that of the kitchen garden, where my servants slept in a house standing by itself, on the other side of the wall of the enclosure which protected my fruits and vegetables from the raids of marauders. I covered myself up to the eyes in the bed which was assigned to me, but could not sleep, and I waited for the dawn, listening to the throbbing of my heart. I had given orders that my servants were to be summoned to the hotel at daybreak, and that my valet de chambre knocked at my door at 7 o'clock in the morning. His countenance bore a woeful look. "A great misfortune has happened during the night, monsieur," said he. "What is it?" "Somebody has stolen the whole of monsieur's furniture, all, everything, even to the smallest articles." This news pleased me. Why? Who knows? I was complete master of myself, bent on dissimulating, on telling no one of anything I'd seen, determined on concealing and in burying in my heart of hearts a terrible secret, I responded. They must be the same people who've stolen my keys. The police must be informed immediately. I'm going to get up and I'll join you in a few moments. The investigation into the circumstances under which the robbery might have been committed lasted for 5 months. Nothing was found, not even the smallest of my knickknacks, nor the least trace of the thieves. Good gracious, if I had only told them what I knew, if I had said I should have been locked up. I, not the thieves, for I was the only person who had seen everything from the first. Yes, but I know how to keep silence. I shall never refurnish my house. That were indeed useless. The same thing would happen again. I had no desire even to re-enter the house, and I did not re-enter it. I never visited it again. I moved to Paris, to the hotel, and consulted doctors in regard to the condition of my nerves, which had disquieted me a good deal ever since that awful night. They advised me to travel, and I followed their counsel. I began by making an excursion into Italy. The sunshine did me good. For 6 months I wandered about from Genoa to Venice, from Venice to Florence, from Florence to Rome, from Rome to Naples. Then I travelled over Sicily, a country celebrated for its scenery and its monuments, relics left by the Greeks and the Normans. Passing over into Africa, I traversed at my ease that immense desert, yellow and tranquil, in which camels, gazelles and Arab vagabonds roam about, where, in the rare and transparent atmosphere, there hover no vague hauntings, where there is never any night, but always day. I returned to France by Marseille, and in spite of all its Provençal gaiety, the diminished clearness of the sky made me sad. I experienced, in returning to the continent, the peculiar sensation of an illness which I had believed cured, and a dull pain which predicted that the seeds of the disease had not been eradicated. I then returned to Paris. At the end of a month I was very dejected. It was in the autumn, and I determined to make, before winter came, an excursion through Normandy, a country with which I was unacquainted. I began my journey in the best of spirits at Rouen, and for 8 days I wandered about, passive, ravished and enthusiastic, in that ancient city, that astonishing museum of extraordinary Gothic monuments. But one afternoon, about 4 o'clock, as I was sauntering slowly through a seemingly unattractive street, by which there ran a stream as black as the ink called Eau de Robec, my attention, fixed for the moment on the quaint, antique appearance of some of the houses, was suddenly attracted by the view of a series of second-hand furniture shops, which followed one another door after door. Ah, they had carefully chosen their locality, these sordid traffickers in antiques, in that quaint little street, overlooking the sinister stream of water, under those tile and slate-pointed roofs, on which still grinned the veins of bygone days. At the end of these grim storehouses, you saw piled up sculptured chests, Rouen, Sèvres, and Moustier's pottery, painted statues, others of oak, Christs, virgins, saints, church ornaments, chasubles, capes, even sacred vases, and an old gilded wooden tabernacle where a god had hidden himself away. What singular caverns there are in these lofty houses, crowded with objects of every description, where the existence of things seems to be ended, things which have survived their original possessors, their century, their times, their fashions, in order to be bought as curiosities by new generations. My affection for antiques was awakened in that city of antiquaries. I went from shop to shop, crossing in 2 strides the rotten 4-plank bridges thrown over the nauseous current of the Eau de Robec. Heaven protect me, what a shock! At the end of a vault which was crowded with articles of every description, and which seemed to be the entrance to the catacombs of a cemetery of ancient furniture, I suddenly descried one of my most beautiful wardrobes. I approached it, trembling in every limb, trembling to such an extent that I dared not touch it. I put forth my hand. I hesitated. Nevertheless, it was indeed my wardrobe. A unique wardrobe of the time of Louis XIII, recognizable by anyone who'd seen it only once. Casting my eyes suddenly a little farther toward the more somber depths of the gallery, I perceived 3 of my tapestry-covered chairs, and farther on still, my 2 Henry II tables, such rare treasures that people came all the way from Paris to see them. Think, only think in what state of mind I now was. I advanced haltingly, quivering with emotion, but I advanced, for I am brave. I advanced like a knight of the Dark Ages. At every step I found something that belonged to me. My brushes, my books, my tables, my silks, my arms, everything except the bureau full of my letters, and that I could not discover. I walked on, descending to the dark galleries in order to ascend next to the floors above. I was alone. I called out. Nobody answered. I was alone. There was no one in that house. A house as vast and tortuous as a labyrinth. Night came on, and I was compelled to sit down in the darkness on one of my own chairs, for I had no desire to go away. From time to time I shouted, "Hello, hello, somebody!" I had sat there certainly for more than an hour when I heard steps soft and slow. I didn't know from where. I was unable to locate them, but bracing myself up, I called out anew, whereupon I perceived a glimmer of light in the next chamber. "Who is there?" said a voice. "A buyer," I responded. "It's too late to enter thus into a shop." "I have been waiting for you for more than an hour," I answered. "You can come back tomorrow." "Tomorrow I must quit Rouen." I dared not advance, and he did not come to me. I saw always the glimmer of his light, which was shining on a tapestry on which were 2 angels flying over the dead on a field of battle. It belonged to me also. I said, "Well, come here." "I am at your service," he answered. I got up and went toward him. Standing in the center of a large room was a little man, very short and very fat, phenomenally fat, a hideous phenomenon. He had a singular straggling beard, white and yellow, and not a hair on his head, not a hair. As he held his candle aloft at arm's length in order to see me, his cranium appeared to me to resemble a little moon in that vast chamber encumbered with old furniture. His features were wrinkled and brown, and his eyes couldn't be seen. I bought 3 chairs which belonged to myself and paid at once a large sum for them, giving him merely the number of my room at the hotel. They were to be delivered the next day before 9 o'clock. I then started off. He conducted me with much politeness as far as the door. I immediately repaired to the commissaire's office at the Central Police Depot and told the commissaire of the robbery which had been perpetrated and of the discovery I'd just made. He required time to communicate by telegraph with the authorities who had originally charge of the case for information, and he begged me to wait in his office until an answer came back. An hour later, an answer did come back, which was in accord with my statement. "I am going to arrest and interrogate this man at once," he said to me, "for he may have conceived some sort of suspicion and smuggled away out of sight what belongs to you. Will you go and dine and return in 2 hours? I shall then have the man here, and I shall subject him to a fresh interrogation in your presence." "Most gladly, monsieur. I thank you with my whole heart." I went to dine at my hotel, and I ate rather better than I could have believed. I was quite happy now, thinking that the man was in the hands of the police. 2 hours later, I returned to the office of the police functionary who was waiting for me. "Well, monsieur," he said, on perceiving me, "we haven't been able to find your man. My agents can't put their hands on him." "Ah," I felt my heart sinking. "But you have at least found his house?" "Yes, certainly, and what is more, it's now being watched and guarded until his return. As for him, he's disappeared." "Disappeared?" "Yes, disappeared. He ordinarily passes his evenings at the house of a female neighbour who's also a furniture broker, a queer sort of sorceress, the widow Bidouin. She hasn't seen him this evening and can't give any information in regard to him. We must wait until tomorrow. I went away. Ah, how sinister the streets of Rouen seemed to me, how troubled and haunted. I slept so badly that I had a fit of nightmare every time I went off to sleep. As I didn't wish to appear too restless or eager, I waited till 10 o'clock the next day before reporting myself to the police. The merchant hadn't reappeared. His shop remained closed. The commissary said to me, "I've taken all the necessary steps. The court's been made acquainted with the affair. We shall go together to that shop and have it opened, and you shall point out to me all that belongs to you." We drove there in a cab. Police agents were stationed round the building. There was a locksmith too, and the door of the shop was soon opened. On entering, I couldn't discover my wardrobes, my chairs, my tables. I saw nothing of that which had furnished my house. No, nothing, although on the previous evening I could not take a step without encountering something that belonged to me. The chief commissary, much astonished, regarded me at first with suspicion. "My God, monsieur," said I to him, "the disappearance of these articles of furniture coincides strangely with that of the merchant." He laughed. "That is true. You did wrong in buying and paying for the articles which were your own property yesterday. It was that which gave him the cue." "What seems to me incomprehensible," I replied, "is that all the places that were occupied by my furniture are now filled with other furniture." "Oh," responded the commissary, "he's had all night, and has no doubt been assisted by accomplices. This house must communicate with its neighbours. But have no fear, monsieur. I'll have the affair promptly and thoroughly investigated. The brigand shall not escape us for long, seeing that we are in charge of the den." Ah, my heart, my poor heart, how it beats. I remained a fortnight at Rouen. The man didn't return. Heavens, good heavens, that man. What was it that could have frightened and surprised him? But on the 16th day, early in the morning, I received from my gardener, now the keeper of my empty and pillaged house, the following strange letter. "Monsieur, I have the honour to inform monsieur that something happened the evening before last, which nobody can understand, and the police no more than the rest of us. The whole of the furniture has been returned. Not one piece is missing. Everything is in its place, up to the very smallest articles. The house is now the same in every respect as it was before the robbery took place. It's enough to make one lose one's head. The thing took place during the night, Friday to Saturday. The roads are dug up as though the whole fence had been dragged from its place up to the door. The same thing was observed the day after the disappearance of the furniture. We are anxiously expecting monsieur, whose very humble and obedient servant I am, Philippe Rodin." Ah, no. Ah, never. Ah, no. I shall never return there. I took the letter to the commissary of police. "It's a very clever restitution," said he. "Let's bury the hatchet. We shall nip the man one of these days." But he has never been nipped. No, they have not nipped him. And I am afraid of him now, as if of some ferocious animal that has been let loose behind me. Inexplicable, it's inexplicable, this chimera of a moonstruck skull. We shall never solve or comprehend it. I shall not return to my former residence. What does it matter to me? I'm afraid of encountering that man again, and I shall not run the risk. And even if he returns, if he takes possession of his shop, who is to prove that my furniture was on his premises? There's only my testimony against him, and I feel that that is not above suspicion. Ah no, this kind of existence has become unendurable. I have not been able to guard the secret of what I've seen. I couldn't continue to live like the rest of the world, with the great fear upon me that those scenes might be reenacted. So I have come to consult the doctor who directs this lunatic asylum, and I've told him everything. After questioning me for a long time, he said to me, "Will you consent, monsieur, to remain here for some time?" "Most willingly, monsieur. You have some means? Yes, monsieur. Will you have isolated apartments? Yes, monsieur. Would you care to receive any friends? No, monsieur. No, nobody. The man from Rouen might take it into his head to pursue me here, to be revenged on me. I have been alone, all alone for 3 months. I'm growing tranquil by degrees. I have no longer any fears. If the antiquary should go mad, and if he should be brought into this asylum, even prisons themselves are not places of security.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody dies. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back?
So that was Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant, and it was requested by my patron Finn Narthex. So thanks very much for Finn for suggesting that one. I found it on the internet. Of course, I've got a book of Guy de Maupassant's stories, but I didn't even think of looking through that because I found a link to this one, so it was easier to read it on the screen. During the recent discussion that's been about whether I should comment after the stories, I'm going to do it actually, I'm going to keep doing it, but a good idea came up and it was suggested by at least 2 people, and that was that I timestamp the discussion. And apparently the purpose of this is so that people can look at the story and they know how long it takes them to fall asleep or something, and they can look at it and go, the whole episode is 1 hour 10 minutes. However, the story is only 40 minutes. So they may then make a calculation that they need so many minutes to fall asleep, and if the length of the story isn't long enough, then they would seek something elsewhere. I suppose that's what it is. Anyway, it doesn't seem like a bad idea, and it's relatively easy for me to implement. So if I remember, so I will do that. Let's say something about the story now. Remember, if you've listened this far and you don't want to listen, please stop. And I've got compilations for hours and audiobooks. I've got The Phantom of the Opera, no commentary. I've got Frankenstein, I've got Dracula, I've got all of those. Turn of the Screw, Don't Look Now. I've got a lot of many hour long works that don't have any of my commentary. So please enjoy those, and don't listen to me if you don't want to. Okay, Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant. So Guy de Maupassant, born in 1850, died in 1893, was a French writer who made significant contributions to the development of the short story genre during the latter half of the 19th century. He was born in Tourville-sur-Arc, France. Maupassant was influenced by the literary circle of Gustave Flaubert, who became his mentor. He published a famous short story, Boule de Suif, meaning the dumpling. And a lot of his, that was 1880, a lot of his stories initially dealt with the kind of situation around the Franco-Prussian War. He wrote 300 short stories, goodness me, 6 novels and 3 travel books, and a volume of poetry. 2 stories which we need to kind of reference are this one, Qui sait, Who Knows, from 1890, and The Hauler, Orla, 1887. Which apparently it's not a French word, orla, but it's thought to be or, meaning outside, la, out there, meaning something like out there. And I've done it, so I'm going to put a link if I remember, but if not, please go and look for it in the history. And it is like this about a man who may be insane because a lot of paranoid, weird stuff with a real paranoid flavour. I'm going to probably mention that later, comes up in the story, and like in both the stories, right? So he explores themes of madness, the supernatural, and the darker aspects of human nature. Maupassant's life was cut short by the effects of syphilis, which he contracted in his youth. After a suicide attempt in 1892, he was committed to a mental asylum in Paris, where he died in 1893 at the age of 42. Let me just check. I thought he killed himself. No, he didn't kill himself. It was an attempted suicide, and then he was
institutionalized, and he died then probably of the syphilis. So it's worth saying something about syphilis. I remember when I was doing my training, it had died out because we treated it with antibiotics, but before it was a terribly common disease. In the late 19th and early 20th, syphilis was a major cause of insanity, and there's neurosyphilis, which is the third stage, I think. The disease, which is caused by the bacterium Treponema pallidum, was widespread and untreatable until antibiotics, and it would go through several stages. So first of all, I remember you get a sore, it goes away for quite a long time, it comes back, and then you have physical symptoms, and the final stage is it gets into your brain, so the brain and the spinal cord, causing a range of neurological and psychiatric symptoms, including delusions, hallucinations, memory loss, personality change. And in fact, the asylums were crowded with syphilis-related insanity, which they used to call general paralysis of the insane. And, it was really common. And I remember when I worked in psych liaison in a general hospital for a number of years, actually. And we would, sometimes it wouldn't be clear. It would be clear that somebody was in fact psychotic, and it wouldn't be clear why. It wasn't a delirium, and it wasn't clearly any functional disorder, such as, it didn't look like bipolar affective disorder or schizophrenia. So, but they were psychotic, and we would kind of test them, and almost like we would, as a act of desperation, we would go like, we don't know, so I'll tell you what, let's check for syphilis. We'd check for HIV, we'd check for syphilis, and it never was syphilis. Never. In all those years, we never had a patient. And I remember one guy who was like, he'd been a sailor around the world, and in the Merchant Navy when he was younger, he was an older man, and we're like, oh yeah, maybe it's, because we couldn't come up with any other reason why he was so, I mean, okay, there are lots of things, so, and the other one was like viral encephalitis. We would, somebody who's been sane suddenly becomes really almost, and sometimes violently, psychotic, Anyway, so he had it. So towards the end of his life, given the progression of his syphilis and its known effects on the brain, it's possible that he was having, this is my theory, probably somebody cleverer than me has come up with this, but that he was having some symptoms of paranoia and delusional thinking, and potentially even hallucinations, that, and this story, what is that, isn't it? So like the Orla, it's the same thing. We don't know, and I think this story is very clever because it is called Who Knows, and ultimately neither we nor the protagonist have a clue as to what's really going on. So I think obviously, and people do this with Turn of the Screw as well, which came out just after Who Knows. So it's unlikely that he wouldn't have read it beforehand. Let me check that again. Yes, Turn of the Screws, 1898. So he definitely wouldn't have read it. But of course, I only mention that because that's said to be the first psychological horror story or ghost story where psychology plays a major part, and we wonder whether the protagonist is actually insane or paranoid, having paranoid delusions and hallucinations, rather than it being a straight thing. So, but I think de Maupassant kind of precedes that. Maybe we're saying it was in English, Turn of the Screw, but it seems to me that that's what we're looking at here. So let's look at the evidence just for fun. As I say in the notes, I've probably been reading too many detective stories recently that I'm like, yeah, let's look at the evidence. So let's look at the evidence. So the fact that to suggest it's maybe insanity is he himself wonders what's happening, and he expresses how strange and odd and silly but yet worrying it is, and that is, of course, people who suffer from mental disease disorders often have a feeling of dread and a knowing that something's not right, but they don't know just what, and they wonder about themselves. Obviously, it's very common. So there's that.
There's the fact that he's the only one who sees this antiquarian. Is the fact that he checks himself into a mental institute. Why would you do that if you had no doubts about what you'd seen? He clearly does have doubts about his own sanity, and he checks into a mental asylum. And he and the doctor, he doesn't say, "Oh, go on, get out of here." Now, of course, we might be cynical and say, "Well, the doctor's getting paid for this," so, but that would be very, very cynical, and we would never have a psychiatrist just giving someone a diagnosis because that person comes to them and says, "You know what? I think I've got this," and he goes, "Oh yeah, give me your fee, give me the fee, and I'll give you the diagnosis." That would never, never, never happen with any conditions that we're having at the moment in our society, like exploding mental health conditions. Not a mental health condition that makes you explode, but there is a real increase in certain conditions being diagnosed. And I said, if I sent my grandmother, they would diagnose her, and she's dead. So anyway, that's just me interjecting. This is why you're here, I guess. But those are just my own thoughts. So there we have it. Yeah, insane, mental asylum, nobody sees the antiquary. But what about the argument? So we go, yeah, it's hallucination. I mean, come on, furniture doesn't move apart from in Beauty and the Beast. It does. In Fantasia, I want to say, does it do it there? Anyway, apart from in cartoons and children's stories, does furniture move? No, it doesn't generally on its own. So that is to suggest it's insanity. However, let's look at it from the other point of view. The furniture really did go. Yeah, somebody. So if you're saying it's not insanity, somebody came and stole all his furniture, moved it to a shop in Rouen, then took it away from the shop when the no, they didn't, because that could have been a hallucination. But the fact is, his furniture did move. And then it moves back overnight. Somebody moves the fence. His gardener is a witness to this. The fact that the police take him seriously, so he goes and says, I mean, can you imagine? I'm being really cynical. The police being interested in a burglary. I was burgled once. They could not care less. And in fact, I don't know if you remember me going on about when my car had the catalytic converter stolen. And that was a real pain. Again, police were very pleasant, but had no intention of investigating it. But the police in this case take him seriously. So that suggests it is true. It is, and if it's true, it's supernatural, because that's the only explanation. A comment because Guy de Maupassant wasn't stupid, and so there's a comment by the police commissary who says, I've just done the Phantom of the Opera, so I'm used to French police at the moment. I'm probably going to do a Maigret detective story, so I'm going to be totally immersed in the French police system soon, but if I'm not already. But where was I? Yeah, the police officer says, he says, oh, it's all gone. He says, oh yeah, well, he had all night to do it, and he could have had some accomplices. Well, if we rule out the accomplices, what the police officer is suggesting is that moving all that furniture overnight, he didn't see the amount of it, to be fair. But is Maupassant actually saying, do you know what, a man could do it overnight? Is he saying that? I think he might be saying that. And that is another undermining of our hero's argument that it's supernatural. So, but on the whole, and then of course in the end, the thing that suggests that he is insane, jumping back to the insanity, is he says at the end about the place, the asylum, not being a safe place because the antiquary might come and revenge himself on me. What for? You haven't done anything to the antiquary. So again, this is a flavour of paranoia, when you begin to suspect people are out to get you when they're not. I think what is good about the story is that it is, who knows? I don't love the title, but it's a good title. If you can have both things, I think aesthetically I don't love it, but I think it encapsulates the story. Who knows? We don't know. And whichever way we go from the evidence we have, I don't think we can come firmly down on either side. So we end up with who knows. But I mean, we may have a preference. Each of us, each of you who's heard it will have a preference. Some of you will think, oh yeah, it's obviously an insanity, or others will go, no, it's definitely supernatural. Me, I tend to go for the supernatural, but then that is what I am. The last, that's what I'm into, the last lines, even prisons themselves are not places of security. So literally, we take it as the antiquary could come and get him. Yeah, fine. How could he break in? And then the other thing, on a metaphorical level, the prison can be seen as a symbol for the narrator's own mind and his inability to find peace and security even within the walls of the asylum mirrors his psychological turmoil. But in the end, who knows?